Nurse sits at the wrong table on a blind date. She had no idea he was the new surgeon at the hospital. What happened next shocked everyone. Hello, viewer. Thanks for joining us. Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments, along with the city you're watching from. Now let's continue with the story. Emma Reynolds pushed open the heavy glass door of the Bistro St. Clair, glancing around in search of a face she had only glimpsed in a hastily sent photo on her phone. The restaurant's warm lighting and soft classical music soothed her nerves, at least momentarily. She was 29, a dedicated ICU nurse at Boston's Hospital Memorial, and she rarely had time for nights out. In fact, her friend Charlotte Hudson had practically coerced her into accepting this blind date, promising it would do her good to meet someone new. She clutched her small black purse against her side and smoothed down her simple burgundy dress, feeling her heart flutter with a mix of curiosity and anxiety. The polished hardwood floors reflected little pools of light around the tables, each elegantly set with crisp white linens and flickering candles. Waiters, dressed in neat black vests, bustled between guests, offering menus and wine suggestions. Emma had never seen the place this busy before. She had come once, ages ago, for a co-worker's birthday, but it had been far quieter then. Her phone buzzed with a message from Charlotte. "You there yet? Don't chicken out. He's wearing a navy jacket, I think." Emma took a steadying breath and scanned the tables. A man sat alone by the window wearing a suit jacket, sipping what looked like sparkling water. The lighting illuminated subtle flecks of silver in his dark hair. From where she stood, he seemed to be waiting. She hoped it was Oliver, the nurse from another hospital whom Charlotte had set her up with. She had only exchanged a couple of text messages with him, so there was still a veil of mystery around who he truly was. Unsure, she approached the table. The man looked up, and their eyes met. He had a composed, almost reserved expression, but something about him felt warm and genuinely interested when he saw her. Emma's cheeks flushed slightly. "Hi," she said, trying her best to sound confident. "You must be Oliver." The man hesitated for half a second. Yes, I suppose I am," he replied with a slight smile. She took a seat across from him, carefully placing her purse on the chair beside her. No sooner had she settled in than she noticed subtle details, a faint hint of tension around his eyes, as if he were used to carrying responsibility, a subdued sense of poise that suggested a certain discipline in his daily life. He introduced himself simply as James, though Emma assumed Oliver must have preferred using his middle name or something similar. Still, she found it a bit odd, but her nerves prevented her from questioning it further. They began chatting, and she was surprised at how easy it felt to open up. She told him about her work in the ICU, how she often felt torn between compassion for her patients and the relentless demands of hospital protocols. He listened intently, occasionally interjecting to ask for more details or clarifications. She found his curiosity refreshing. Most people shied away from discussing anything too intense on a first date. "You must see some pretty difficult cases," he remarked, swirling his water glass thoughtfully. Emma nodded. "It can be tough, especially when the families come in expecting miracles. We do all we can, but the reality is, sometimes it isn't enough." She admitted she was surprised at how sympathetic he seemed, asking genuine questions about her patients and the emotional toll that ICU work took on her. Typically, prospective dates seemed put off or discomforted when she discussed matters of life and death, preferring lighter topics. He offered a quiet smile. "I find it admirable that you're so committed. It's not an easy job to handle." For a moment, Emma felt truly seen, as though he recognized her passion rather than viewing it as a grim curiosity. The more they talked, the more she relaxed, sipping a glass of white wine the waiter brought her. Every now and then, she'd wonder why the name James felt like it should mean something more, but she quickly dismissed the thought. She reminded herself that blind dates were often riddled with small misunderstandings. Maybe Charlotte had shared the wrong name initially. The conversation flowed so smoothly that the bustling restaurant and the clatter of dishes faded into the background. Emma found out he was in healthcare, though he didn't elaborate much on his specific role. He seemed intrigued by her stories of daily hospital life, caring for the elderly with no family visitors, celebrating the small triumphs with patients who overcame critical conditions, and mourning the inevitable losses. She sensed a spark of empathy in him that she rarely encountered. When the check arrived, he insisted on paying, politely waving off her offer to split. As they stepped outside, the crisp Boston evening air greeted them. A gentle drizzle pattered on the sidewalk, reflecting the city lights in scattered droplets. They shared a brief smile under the restaurant's awning, both noticing the quiet connection that had formed in just a couple of hours. "I had a really nice time," Emma admitted, hugging her purse closer. "So did I," he replied with genuine warmth. "Perhaps we can continue this conversation soon." Emma nodded, feeling a hint of excitement she hadn't allowed herself in a long time. She offered a small wave, then walked to her car, her mind swirling with questions and a budding sense of hope. She had no idea what awaited her the next morning at the hospital. Early the next day, Emma walked into the fluorescent-lit corridors of Hospital Memorial, still replaying snippets of conversation from the night before. The cozy ambience of the bistro seemed worlds away from the brisk, efficient atmosphere of the ICU. Staff hurried past with charts in hand, monitors beeped incessantly, and the robust smell of antiseptic reminded Emma that reality had returned in full force. She made her way to the staff locker room, stowed her belongings, and pulled on her scrubs. Her thoughts drifted to James and the gentle smile he wore when he listened to her stories. No date had ever left her feeling so at ease. She was certain she wanted to see him again, but also couldn't shake a small pang of uncertainty. Why had he introduced himself with a name that didn't match her friend's description? Her reflection was interrupted by the bustling entrance of Charlotte Hudson, who, at 32, was an effervescent soul with curly blonde hair and an ever-present grin. Charlotte spun around dramatically, crossing her arms over her chest with mock outrage. "I have been dying to hear about last night. I texted Oliver, but he said he never even got to see you. Did you bail?" she teased. Emma blinked. "That's weird. I had dinner with him, or at least I thought so. He was there at a window table, wearing a suit jacket. We talked for hours." Charlotte's brow furrowed. "Oliver told me he waited by the bar. He wasn't wearing a suit jacket. He had a casual navy blazer. And he left after half an hour because you didn't show." Emma felt her stomach lurch. Had she really sat down with the wrong man? That would explain why he said his name was James. Heat rose to her cheeks at the realization. Before she could elaborate, the hospital speaker crackled overhead, summoning the entire ICU team to an urgent meeting in Conference Room C. Charlotte gave Emma a wide-eyed look, and they hurried out together. Word had been circling that the hospital was bringing in a highly regarded neuro specialist, but most details had been kept under wraps. The staff had been bracing for someone with a potentially intimidating reputation. In the hallway, they bumped into Dr. Marianne Brown, head of the nursing department, a woman of 45 with a commanding presence balanced by compassionate brown eyes. She gave them both a nod and motioned for them to follow her quickly. "Rumor has it the new neurosurgeon is going to be introduced to the entire critical care staff. The director wants all hands on deck." Emma and Charlotte exchanged glances. This was big news. Neurosurgeons with major reputations didn't just appear out of nowhere. The hospital must have pulled some serious strings to get him. Emma's mind slipped briefly to James, wondering about his day, wishing she could text him, but she forced her focus back to the job at hand. Conference room C was buzzing with low murmurs as doctors, nurses, and administrative staff trickled in. The director of the hospital, Dr. Carver, took his position at the front. Emma found a seat near the middle, with Charlotte on one side and a few other ICU nurses on the other. She felt a wave of anticipation swirl around them like a tangible fog. Dr. Carver cleared his throat. "Good morning, everyone. I appreciate your attendance on such short notice. I have the privilege of announcing that we have successfully recruited Dr. James Grant to lead our neuro department. He comes with an exceptional track record and is recognized nationally for his contributions to complex neurosurgery procedures." Emma's ears began to ring. She replayed Dr. Carver's statement in her mind. James Grant. Her heart drummed faster. That was the man she had shared dinner with last night, thinking he was her blind date. She felt a rush of heat flood her cheeks. She could hardly believe it. He was not just another hospital employee. He was one of the most celebrated neurosurgeons in the country and, more importantly, her new boss on the neuro floor. As the door opened at the back of the room, Dr. James Grant stepped in with confident strides. He wore a crisp white lab coat over his tailored suit, exuding a calm, methodical air. When their eyes met, Emma's stomach flipped. He offered the room a polite, professional smile. Though he kept his composure, there was the faintest flicker of recognition in his expression when he spotted Emma. The hush in the room felt deafening to her. Charlotte cast a puzzled glance in Emma's direction, noting her sudden rigid posture. Emma didn't say a word, her mind racing to piece together what this meant for her everyday work life. 100 questions flooded her thoughts. Why hadn't he told her who he was? Had he known who she was at the restaurant? Dr. Carver continued introducing James to the team, praising his background in advanced neurological research and his leadership on groundbreaking surgical methods. Some staff members nodded eagerly, while others wore guarded expressions. Emma couldn't hear everything being said. Her focus was locked on James, remembering how he'd listened so attentively to her stories in the bistro's candlelight, never hinting at his own expertise or position of authority. When James finally spoke, his voice was calm and authoritative, revealing only a fraction of the warmth she'd experienced the previous night. Emma realized that life as she knew it at the hospital was about to change in ways she couldn't have imagined. Emma stood frozen in the conference room as the meeting concluded. Everyone around her rose to shake Dr. James Grant's hand, or at least introduce themselves. She lingered near her seat, heart pounding. Her thoughts circled around his choice not to disclose his identity. Did he find amusement in her ignorance, or was he just seeking a normal conversation? The line of staff waiting to meet James moved slowly. Charlotte caught Emma's eye and whispered, "Are you okay?" "You look like you've seen a ghost," Emma inhaled sharply. "I just realized James is the man I had dinner with last night." She tried to keep her voice low, but Charlotte's jaw dropped anyway. "No way," Charlotte hissed in disbelief. "So he's the new surgeon? That's insane." Emma wasn't sure if she felt mortified or betrayed. Her pulse thudded as she watched him shake hands with Dr. Marianne Brown, who introduced herself with her usual confident tone. When his gaze flickered toward Emma, she quickly turned away, pretending to adjust the strap of her ID badge. The staff dispersed, leaving James near the front with Dr. Carver. Emma considered making a discreet exit but realized she couldn't hide forever. Summoning her courage, she approached them. Dr. Carver gave her a polite nod. "Emma Reynolds, right?" Dr. Carver said. "I've been told you're one of our most dedicated ICU nurses." "James Key, this is Emma." He introduced them formally, clearly not aware of the personal history that had unfolded just hours earlier. James turned to face her with professional politeness. "Pleased to meet you, Ms. Reynolds." His voice was measured, his expression neutral. Emma's cheeks felt hot. "Likewise, Dr. Grant." She tried to match his composure, hoping the tension roiling inside her wasn't obvious. There was a momentary pause, a loaded silence that only the two of them seemed aware of. Then Dr. Carver excused himself, leaving them in an awkward standstill. "Emma," James said quietly once they were alone. I didn't realize you worked here at Memorial until Dr. Carver mentioned the ICU staff just now." Her eyes flickered with uncertainty. "I assumed you were Oliver. You never corrected me." He let out a small sigh. "I'm sorry. I was caught off guard. You came over so confidently, and I wanted a chance to talk to someone without the shadow of my career hanging over me. It's not an excuse, just an explanation." Emma crossed her arms, feeling a swirl of conflicting emotions. "You could have mentioned it at some point," he nodded, brows knitted together. "You're right, it wasn't fair of me to stay silent. But for what it's worth, I enjoyed our conversation. You didn't see me as some intimidating doctor. It's rare that I get to speak with someone so passionately about patient care without them treading carefully around my supposed reputation." She shifted on her feet, uncertain whether to feel flattered or annoyed. "I suppose I understand, but it puts me in a difficult position, especially now that you're my superior. And what about Oliver? He never even met me." James looked genuinely regretful. "I can't speak for Oliver, but I promise I had no intention of deceiving you." They both stood quietly for a moment. Emma recalled the warmth in his eyes at dinner, the sincerity in his questions about her work. Her anger softened slightly, replaced by a sense of guarded confusion. She wasn't entirely sure how to navigate this new dynamic. James, the kind stranger who had listened to her heartfelt stories, was also Dr. Grant, the notoriously rigorous neurosurgeon who would be setting high standards for the hospital's neuro department. "I need some time to process this," she said at last, keeping her voice low. James dipped his head in understanding. "Of course. I hope we can still work together effectively, and if you ever want to talk about it, you know where to find me." Emma nodded and left the conference room, her nerves still jangling. She hurried down the hallway to the ICU, where the steady beep of monitors and hushed conversations offered a kind of refuge. She threw herself into her routine, checking vitals, updating patient charts, speaking gently with families. Yet, beneath the surface, she felt restless. Each time she passed a reflective window or a vacant room, the memory of the previous night flitted through her mind like an echo. Toward the end of her shift, she caught sight of James again, this time in a white coat with his name embroidered in neat lettering. He was conversing with a neurologist about an upcoming procedure. He glanced in her direction, but she swiftly turned her attention to the chart in her hands. That evening, she confided in Charlotte, who listened wide-eyed. "So what are you going to do?" Charlotte asked, perched on a chair in the nearly empty staff lounge. Emma exhaled slowly. "I'm not sure. Right now, I just want to focus on my job. Whatever happened last night, it's complicated. And he has this reputation for being almost too perfect, demanding, relentless. It's intimidating." Charlotte offered a sympathetic pat on her hand. "You'll handle it, Emma. You always find a way." Emma managed a faint smile. She wished she felt as confident as Charlotte sounded. For now, the only certainty was that her once simple routine at Hospital Memorial had been turned on its head. The following week, Emma found it nearly impossible to avoid James. The hospital was abuzz with his arrival, and his expertise in neurosurgery drew curiosity from nearly every department, from briefings on upcoming patient cases to impromptu hallway discussions. He was everywhere, and so was the chatter about his demanding standards. One morning, Dr. Marianne Brown gathered the ICU nurses for a quick huddle. "We have a new patient in critical condition," she said, glancing at the chart in her hand. Mr. Bernard Coakley, 68, admitted with a severe hemorrhagic stroke. Neurosurgery has taken over the case, so you'll be coordinating with Dr. Grant. Emma's stomach tightened. She kept her face neutral, recalling her last interaction with James. Determined to stay professional, she listened closely while Dr. Brown assigned tasks. Later, Emma entered Bernard Coakley's room, carefully checking the monitors that beeped in rhythmic patterns. The elderly man lay motionless, his breathing assisted by a ventilator. Emma murmured a soft greeting, even though he was unresponsive. She always believed patients deserved to be treated with dignity, conscious or not. Moments after, she heard footsteps and turned to see James standing in the doorway. His expression was serious, focused completely on Mr. Coakley's condition. He stepped in, nodding at Emma, then pulled up the patient's scans on the screen. He spoke quietly. "His bleeding is extensive. We're discussing possible neurosurgery, but the risk is high." He paused, glancing at Emma. "We need to weigh the benefits against the patient's quality of life." Emma felt a pang of compassion for Mr. Coakley and his family, who had spent the past couple of days in the waiting area, looking hollow with worry. "I'll do whatever's necessary to keep him stable," she said, her tone measured. James nodded. "We'll be monitoring intracranial pressure closely. Let me know of any changes immediately." His gaze lingered on Emma for a second, as though he wanted to say something more, but instead he returned his attention to the scan. She wondered if he was thinking about their own unresolved tension. Stepping out of the room, Emma ran into Charlotte, who gently nudged her. "How's working with Dr. Grant so far?" she asked, her eyes glimmering with curiosity. Emma managed a wry smile. "He's efficient, very professional, and definitely demanding." Truthfully, she admired his attention to detail and the calm authority he projected. But it also reignited the unsettled feelings that had been simmering since their dinner. During lunch break, Emma found a corner table in the staff cafeteria, hoping for a moment of quiet. A voice interrupted her solitude. Dr. Aaron Green, an anesthesiologist who occasionally worked in the ICU. He carried a tray with a simple salad and fruit cup. "Mind if I join you?" he asked. Emma shook her head. Tall and approachable, Dr. Green had a friendly air about him, making it easy to converse. They talked a bit about Mr. Coakley's prognosis, then the subject shifted toward Dr. Grant's presence. "He's known for having very high expectations," Dr. Green commented, "but I hear he's brilliant. The hospital's board is excited about the advanced procedures he might bring." Emma hummed. "Yes, I've seen his thoroughness. He's thorough with everything." She hoped her tone sounded casual. Dr. Green gave her a curious glance, but didn't pry. A buzz of tension drifted over from a nearby table. Dr. Robert Phillips, a senior figure who often influenced the hospital board, was speaking loudly about the need to boost the hospital's profile and attract more high-revenue cases. Emma bristled at the tone of his remarks. It was common knowledge he viewed patients as numbers in a ledger, prioritizing prestige over genuine care. Later that day, Dr. Marianne Brown asked Emma to sit in on a preliminary meeting about expanding the hospital's transplant program. Emma, who had dealt with numerous post-transplant patients in the ICU, agreed. She found herself in a small conference room with Dr. Phillips, a few other department heads, and unexpectedly James, who stepped in just as the discussion began. Dr. Phillips wasted no time, pointing at a chart projected on the wall. "We need to show results fast. If we manage a few high-profile transplants successfully, we can attract funding from donors and private entities. We must seize this opportunity." Emma watched James carefully. He was silent, arms crossed, scanning the data. She wondered if he supported Dr. Phillips's strategy or if he had concerns about focusing on fast results over proper patient triage. Eventually, James spoke in a measured tone. "Yes, Expansion is beneficial, but patient selection must be thorough. We can't rush high-risk transplants just to generate headlines. If we're not meticulous, we could compromise patient outcomes. Emma felt a surge of respect for him. She found herself nodding in agreement. Dr. Phillips, however, dismissed James's caution with a wave of his hand. There is always risk in major surgery. What's important is that we seize the public interest quickly. Emma sensed the first tremor of conflict. She felt a moral dilemma forming. Dr. Phillips's push for recognition versus James's insistence on meticulous care. Though her role in the meeting was minor, she couldn't ignore the knots in her stomach. It made her question how far the hospital might go to secure its reputation. She realized she wasn't the only one confronting challenges. James was clearly navigating political pressures too. When the meeting ended, James gave Emma a brief glance, his eyes revealing both fatigue and a flicker of resolve. She suspected the coming weeks would be more intense than she had imagined. 2 days later, Emma stood outside the hospital's main entrance, taking a moment to breathe in the fresh morning air. Rain had fallen overnight, leaving the sidewalks gleaming under the early sunlight. She was due to head inside for a critical update on Mr. Coakley's condition, but she needed a second to steady herself. The emotional weight of her job seemed heavier than usual, complicated by the fact that her new direct supervisor was the man who had unknowingly stood in for her blind date. She finally walked in, heading straight to the ICU. As she checked on Mr. Coakley's vital signs, she noticed subtle improvements. His intracranial pressure had stabilized slightly, and though he was far from out of danger, Emma clung to the possibility that he might pull through. James arrived a short while later, scanning the monitors with intense focus. He acknowledged Emma with a polite nod, but neither spoke more than necessary about personal matters. Their interactions were professional, almost too formal, she thought. Afterward, Dr. Marianne Brown pulled Emma aside. "James wants you in the next meeting regarding the transplant program," she said. "He specifically requested input from ICU nurses, and you're the most experienced with complex cases." Emma's heart pounded at the idea of working so closely with James. "I'd be honored to attend," she replied, determined to keep her composure. Before the meeting, Emma stopped by the hospital cafeteria for a quick coffee. She spotted the familiar figure of Mrs. Jenkins, a former patient who had been discharged a few months ago after recovering from a dangerous infection. The older woman, petite with silver-streaked hair, waved Emma over with a bright smile. "My dear, it's so good to see you," Mrs. Jenkins greeted, her voice warm. "You nursed me back when they thought I'd have to go to long-term care. How are you?" Emma's spirits lifted. "I'm doing well, thank you. How about you? Feeling healthy?" Mrs. Jenkins beamed. "Never better. I'm grateful every day." "What brings that worried crease to your forehead today?" Emma hesitated, but there was something comforting about Mrs. Jenkins's presence. "Work's just a bit complicated right now," she answered, trying not to delve into details about her predicament with James and the tension around the transplant program. Mrs. Jenkins patted Emma's hand gently. "Complications often lead to new beginnings, dear. You're strong, and you have a compassionate heart. Don't forget that when things feel overwhelming..." Emma smiled, genuinely touched by the reminder. It was a small but meaningful boost of encouragement. After saying goodbye to Mrs. Jenkins, she hurried to the conference room, replaying the woman's words in her mind. Seated at a large oval table, Emma joined James, Dr. Aaron Green, Dr. Marianne Brown, and a few other specialists. The meeting launched into a detailed discussion about potential recipients and the protocols for transplant surgeries. Emma had carefully reviewed the criteria and brought notes about the ICU capacity, patient recovery steps, and the ethics of prioritizing certain patients. She felt a hint of nerves presenting her points, but the group listened respectfully. James addressed the room. "We have to maintain a fair system. Our priority should be the sickest patients who also have a viable chance of recovery. If we deviate for prestige or donor influence, we risk compromising our standards." Emma sensed Dr. Phillips's presence like a looming shadow, though he wasn't at this specific meeting. She felt relieved but also cautious. She spoke up, describing the emotional toll on patients and families if the hospital made exceptions, leaving those truly in need waiting. When she finished, she noticed James's quiet nod of approval. After the meeting, James approached her in the hallway. "You presented well, Emma. That perspective from the ICU is exactly what the program needs." She felt a mix of gratitude and lingering awkwardness. "Thank you, I hope it made sense." He offered a faint smile. "It did. Listen, about everything. I know our first encounter was unusual. I want you to know, I respect you as a professional. You're good at what you do." Emma studied his expression, torn between the warmth in his eyes and the formal barrier that existed between them. "I appreciate that," she replied softly. They walked side by side through the corridor, passing the constant hum of hospital life, rolling gurneys, phone calls, the shuffle of staff shoes on the polished floor. Emma glanced at James, recalling Mrs. Jenkins's words about complications leading to new beginnings. She couldn't deny there was a spark beneath the layers of formality, yet each step closer felt like stepping deeper into unfamiliar territory. That evening, as Emma prepared to leave, Dr. Marianne Brown caught her by the nurses' station. "Emma, you're doing exceptional work. Don't doubt yourself. We need strong voices right now to keep this hospital's integrity intact." Emma nodded, absorbing the praise. She thought about Mr. Coakley, still in critical care, and the swirl of challenges around the transplant program. She wondered what her next move should be, both as a nurse fighting for ethical standards and as a woman grappling with her feelings about James Grant. In the back of her mind, she sensed that stepping into this unknown might change her life more than she could ever predict. Emma had arrived at the hospital early, hoping to review her patients' charts before the usual bustle began. She was flipping through Mr. Coakley's latest test results, still concerned about his unstable vitals, when a quiet knock on the break room door drew her attention. She glanced up to see Dr. Thomas Whitaker, the hospital's senior cardiologist, standing in the doorway with a kindly smile. "Pardon me," he said in a warm, fatherly voice. "I was looking for a moment to speak with you." Emma had always viewed Dr. Whitaker as a respected figure around Hospital Memorial. He was in his mid-50s, with thinning silver hair and deep-set eyes that spoke of years spent caring for heart patients. He carried an air of gentle authority, never rushing or raising his voice. She smiled and invited him inside. "How can I help you, Doctor?" she asked, setting the chart aside. He stepped in and closed the door behind him. "I've noticed that you've been very involved in the discussions around the new transplant program," he began. "I also couldn't help but see the weight you seem to be carrying on your shoulders." She exhaled softly, surprised by his perception. "It's been a little overwhelming. There are so many layers to the hospital's politics that I never had to think about before." Dr. Whitaker nodded. "That's perfectly natural. I remember when I was a younger doctor, I assumed skill and compassion were all it took. Then I realized that behind every procedure and every new initiative, there are budgets, insurance policies, administrators, and board members, each with their own interests." Emma appreciated his candor. She had rarely spoken to him beyond patient care exchanges, but in this moment, he felt almost like a confidant. "I just don't want our hospital to lose sight of what truly matters," she said. "We're here to help people, not just chase accolades and funding." He settled into a chair beside her. You're absolutely right. It's admirable that you hold on to that. Many get lost in the system as the years go by. Look, I've been in meetings with Dr. Grant and Dr. Phillips, and it seems inevitable there will be a clash of values. Phillips is pushing for rapid, headline-worthy progress. Grant appears more cautious, more patient-centered. And you're stuck in the middle of it, as far as I can tell. Emma gave a rueful smile. I didn't plan to be in the middle, but something about it feels important. I keep thinking about how these decisions affect actual lives. Dr. Whitaker leaned forward. That instinct is exactly what our patients need. It's also the reason I came to speak with you. I heard you're presenting some of the ICU's perspectives at the next big transplant committee meeting. I'd be happy to share some insights from the cardiology side, especially around organ compatibility and the complex steps patients go through post-transplant. Emma's eyes lit up. I'd really appreciate that. We're working on guidelines now, and I want to make sure I present the information accurately. I'm not a transplant coordinator by training, but I've seen enough critical cases to know how crucial the right criteria can be. He handed her a small notebook filled with concise notes. Here's some data you might find useful. Read through it, and if you have questions, I'm here. And Emma, don't let the higher-ups intimidate you. The hospital sometimes needs strong-willed individuals to remind everyone of our real purpose. Keep your passion alive. His words settled in her chest like a gentle reassurance. She thanked him, feeling more supported than she had in days. Later that morning, she returned to the ICU and found James reviewing Mr. Coakley's chart. He glanced at her, his expression stoic but polite. I've been monitoring his neuro status. It's touch and go, but I'm planning another evaluation with our surgical team soon. Emma nodded. I'll keep a close eye on his vitals. If there's any shift, I'll page you immediately. He hesitated for a moment. I heard Dr. Whitaker was looking for you earlier. Good man. He's somewhat of a mentor to a lot of staff around here. Emma's face softened. He offered to share his knowledge about transplant protocols with me. I'm grateful. James set the chart down. Whitaker's the kind of doctor who balances compassion and realism. You could learn a great deal from him. Actually, we all could. For a moment, their gazes met with a mutual understanding. Emma was reminded of the evening they first met, without the knowledge of each other's roles, without the burdens of office politics. There was something distinctly reassuring in seeing James give credit to a colleague. It added a layer of humanity to his otherwise businesslike demeanor. The rest of her shift passed in a blur of routine tasks and anxious glances at Mr. Coakley's vitals. She wondered if she could truly make a difference in the looming battle over the transplant program. Yet, the memory of Dr. Whitaker's calm voice and the steadfast conviction in James's expression lingered in her mind. In her heart, she sensed she was on the verge of crossing a line that separated her old world, where she stuck to her nursing duties, from a new realm, where she would speak up for policies and decisions that could alter countless lives. That evening, Emma stayed late to read through Dr. Whitaker's notes. The corridors grew quiet, and the occasional overhead announcement echoed through the otherwise stillness. As she flipped page after page, absorbing data on patient eligibility, success rates, and common pitfalls, she felt the stirrings of both excitement and trepidation. She was stepping beyond her familiar boundaries, and although it frightened her, it also ignited a passion in her soul. 2 days later, Emma found herself wrapping up another long shift in the ICU. Exhaustion tugged at her muscles, but she forced herself to stay focused. As she made her final patient checks, Charlotte Hudson popped into the unit, brimming with a mixture of concern and excitement. Emma, you've been cooped up here all day again. Let's grab a coffee or something, Charlotte urged, pushing her curly blonde hair away from her eyes. You need a break. Emma hesitated, checking the wall clock. She had planned to review more of Dr. Whitaker's notes before her meeting with the transplant committee. Then she remembered the conversation she'd had with him about not losing herself in the system. Relenting, she sighed. Okay, let's do it. 15 minutes, though. They retreated to the hospital's small coffee kiosk, where Emma ordered a latte and Charlotte picked up a chai tea. Grabbing a nearby table, they settled down with weary smiles. Outside the window, the sky was a grayish hue, hinting at a possible rain shower later. "So," Charlotte began, stirring her drink, "there's been a lot of buzz about you lately. Everyone's saying you're knee-deep in the transplant program discussion. You sure you want to dive that far into the hospital's politics?" Emma leaned back, letting out a slow breath. "It's definitely a lot. I never expected to be in the middle of these debates, especially with Dr. Phillips pushing for quick results, and Dr. Grant caught somewhere between him and the rest of us. But it feels important, you know. We're talking about patients' lives." Charlotte nodded. "Just be cautious. People like Dr. Phillips have powerful connections." Emma sipped her latte. "I know. I'm trying to prepare myself for the possibility that standing up for ethical practices could make me some enemies." After their coffee break, Emma headed to the staff lounge to gather her belongings. Her phone buzzed with a message from Dr. Whitaker. "Patient in cardiothoracic ICU, might be relevant to your committee discussion. Come see me." She immediately changed course, navigating her way toward the cardiothoracic wing. She found Dr. Whitaker examining a patient's chart. He beckoned her over with a gentle wave. "Emma, I want you to meet Ms. Irene Ramirez, 52, who's on the waiting list for a heart transplant. She just got transferred from a smaller facility." Emma stepped to the bedside, greeted Ms. Ramirez softly, and found an all-too-familiar look of fatigue and hope in the patient's dark eyes. Dr. Whitaker explained that Ms. Ramirez had advanced heart failure and was one of the hospital's more urgent cases. However, with so many individuals vying for transplants, the waiting list was painfully long, and preference often tilted toward patients who had stronger financial or social support. "Think about Ms. Ramirez when you review the policies," Dr. Whitaker said. "This is a real person, not a statistic. If the board decides to prioritize publicity cases instead of genuine medical urgency, patients like her might never get the chance they deserve." Emma felt her chest tighten. Meeting Ms. Ramirez added a human face to the transplant debate that had, until now, felt somewhat abstract. She thanked Dr. Whitaker and promised to keep Irene's story at the forefront of her mind during the upcoming discussions. That evening, Emma and Charlotte walked out of the hospital together. The crisp autumn air swept over them, and the glow of street lamps highlighted the pavement. As they parted ways, Emma realized just how much her routine had changed. No longer did her days end with a neat boundary. She was carrying the hospital's controversies home with her. At her small apartment, she sank into the old armchair by the window, flipping open her laptop. She began drafting a concise report for the transplant committee, combining Dr. Whitaker's data and her personal experiences in the ICU. Names and faces of real patients, like Ms. Ramirez, floated through her thoughts. She typed passionately, driven by a newfound sense of responsibility. Halfway through her report, her phone buzzed. It was an email from James Grant. Subject: Notes on Transplant Criteria. "Emma, I came across an interesting article about neurological assessments pre-transplant. Attaching it here. It might support your perspective in the meeting. Hope you're well. James." She opened the attachment, surprised to see that he had gone out of his way to gather material for her. Despite their awkward personal history, he seemed committed to working collaboratively. There was something heartening in realizing he valued her input enough to assist. Yet it also reminded her how complicated their dynamic was. Boss, colleague, and the man who'd once sat with her under the soft glow of a restaurant lamp, unaware of each other's true identities. In a moment of introspection, Emma acknowledged she was no longer the nurse who simply clocked in and out, caring for whoever came her way without question. A door had opened, pulling her toward a more active role in shaping how the hospital served its patients. But stepping through it meant accepting the unpredictable challenges ahead, from crossing paths with ambitious administrators to unearthing truths that could disrupt her professional relationships. She thought back to Dr. Whitaker's reassurance about not losing sight of compassion and decided she would let go of her comfort zone. If that meant standing up to the likes of Dr. Phillips, she would, because if she didn't speak for patients like Ms. Ramirez, who would? Emma arrived at the next transplant committee meeting, feeling the weight of her newfound responsibilities. The large conference room was already half full, doctors, administrators, and a few specialized nurses from different units. She recognized Dr. Green, who gave her a slight nod. Dr. Whitaker was off to the side, chatting quietly with a colleague. James was nowhere in sight yet, though she suspected he'd be in attendance. Nerves fluttered in her stomach as she recalled the heartfelt conversation she had with Ms. Ramirez. The memory of the patient's tired but hopeful face fueled her resolve. She set her notes on the table and took a seat near the front, determined to be an active participant rather than a passive observer. Moments later, James walked in, offering a polite greeting to a few people before sitting near Emma. Their eyes met briefly, and he gave her a small smile as if to say, "We're in this together." The unspoken solidarity bolstered her confidence. Dr. Carver, the hospital director, opened the meeting, outlining the agenda, reviewing current transplant candidates, refining selection criteria, and discussing budget concerns. The tone was initially cordial, but Emma sensed an undercurrent of tension. Then came the part she dreaded, Doctor. Robert Phillips cleared his throat loudly. "We have a growing waiting list," Dr. Phillips began, "but we also have a prime opportunity to perform high-profile procedures. If we can showcase successful transplants on patients with significant media attention, it boosts the hospital's standing. More visibility means more donors, more funding. Ultimately, that helps everyone, especially in the long run." Emma bristled, recalling Ms. Ramirez, whose story might be overlooked in this chase for public spotlight. She glanced at James, who sat with his arms folded, clearly deep in thought. He exchanged a glance with Dr. Whitaker. The cardiologist's face was unreadable, but Emma guessed he was restraining his disapproval. When Dr. Carver opened the floor for comments, Emma fought the instinct to remain quiet. She looked down at her notes, her heart pounding. Then she cleared her throat, projecting her voice as steadily as she could. "I understand the importance of public perception," she began, carefully choosing her words. "But the real purpose of any transplant program is to save lives, especially the ones most in need. High-profile cases might bring exposure, but we can't let that overshadow legitimate medical urgency." A moment of silence followed. Emma felt every eye in the room shift toward her. "Doctor." Phillips arched an eyebrow. "Of course. We want to save lives," he replied, his tone carrying a faint edge. "But saving lives and securing resources aren't mutually exclusive. Our hospital must stay competitive in this field." James spoke up. "We can remain competitive by proving we have the highest success rates, which often comes from prioritizing the most viable candidates first. Rushing cases just for publicity could harm our reputation if outcomes are poor. Besides, we'd be neglecting patients who truly have no time to spare," Dr. Whitaker added calmly. "We need to balance both, but it's essential we not compromise our medical ethics in pursuit of headlines." Emma's pulse settled slightly as she realized the three of them, James, Dr. Whitaker, and herself, formed a supportive front. Dr. Phillips looked between them, his jaw tightening. "Understood," he said tersely, "but the board will want to see tangible benefits soon." The conversation moved on, and others chimed in with technical details about organ availability and post-operative resources. Though Emma had joined this meeting expecting to feel intimidated, she felt oddly invigorated, as though stepping into a more purposeful version of herself. Each point she made about patient care and emotional support in the ICU was met with genuine consideration from the more patient-focused committee members. By the time Dr. Carver concluded the meeting, Emma's notebook was filled with scribbled follow-ups and new data requests. Dr. Phillips left swiftly, grumbling about the next round of budget proposals. In contrast, James lingered, exchanging a few cordial words with Dr. Carver. Then he turned to Emma. "You presented your points with clarity," he said quietly, stepping aside so they wouldn't be overheard. "Thank you for advocating so strongly." She managed a grateful smile. "It was nerve-wracking, but if we don't speak up, we might lose sight of what really matters." His eyes softened. "Precisely." He paused, glancing around to ensure they were alone. "Are you free to discuss some details about neurological assessments in transplant patients?" "I have a few data sets you might find useful." Emma nodded, torn between professional duty and a flicker of personal interest she still couldn't ignore. "Yes, let's do that. I'm on shift, but I have a short break in about an hour." He agreed, and she watched him walk away, noticing a subtle lightness in his normally rigid posture. She wondered if he, too, felt a sense of relief at having found an ally in a space dominated by political maneuvering. Gathering her things, Emma left the conference room, her thoughts drifting between Mrs. Ramirez's quiet hope and the intense gaze James had just given her. She recognized this was more than just a meeting. It was a turning point, a crossing from her old routine into a new landscape where her voice could shape decisions. That realization both emboldened and unsettled her, a potent reminder that stepping into new territory rarely comes without risks. An hour later, Emma and James convened in a small alcove near the neuro ward, a quiet corner typically used for brief consultations away from the hectic main corridors. The hum of conversation and the beeping of medical equipment faded behind the closed door. James spread out a series of printed documents on a small table, detailing various neurological factors affecting transplant success rates. "This data includes patient histories from several teaching hospitals," he explained, tapping a highlighted section. "It shows that patients with certain pre-existing neurological conditions have a harder time post-transplant. But if we identify and manage those conditions early, outcomes improve significantly." Emma leaned over the pages, her brow furrowing in concentration. "So the question is whether we have enough resources to manage those conditions pre- and post-op. If Dr. Phillips wants to fast-track certain patients, we might not have time for the deeper assessments." James nodded. "Exactly. This is why your input from the ICU is vital. You see firsthand how well or how poorly patients cope after major surgery." He looked up, meeting her eyes with earnestness. "If we can prove the importance of thorough screening, the committee might be less swayed by superficial metrics." Emma felt a flicker of pride in being part of something that could genuinely improve patient care. "I'm with you," she said. "Let's build a strong case. I know Dr. Whitaker will back us up, and Dr. Green seemed supportive too." They spent the next few minutes reviewing stats and discussing how to organize the information for the next presentation. Emma couldn't help but notice how James switched seamlessly from his role as a commanding surgeon to an approachable colleague when they talked through these points. Eventually, he glanced at the clock. "I need to prep for a consultation," he said, gathering the papers. "I'll email you the digital files." As they stood, Emma hesitated before speaking. "James, I I just want you to know I appreciate you taking my perspective seriously. Not everyone does. He gave a faint smile. I value your perspective, Emma. Always have. The warmth in his voice kindled a moment of connection that neither seemed sure how to navigate. The distant buzz of a pager broke the silence. Emma realized hers was vibrating with a message from the ICU. She offered a quick smile, then stepped out, feeling her heart flutter in a mix of apprehension and an undercurrent of something else, something dangerously close to fondness. Back in the ICU, she found Charlotte waiting with an update on Mr. Coakley, who had taken a mild turn for the worse. She rushed to his bedside, confirming changes in his vital signs. James arrived minutes later, rechecking the scans, speaking rapidly with the on-call neurologist. Once again, they fell into a purely professional rhythm, fast, precise, life-and-death decisions overshadowing any personal entanglements. They stabilized Mr. Coakley, but it was clear his condition was fragile. As Emma removed her gloves afterward, she let out a slow breath, her eyes lingering on the elderly man who lay so vulnerable in the bed. Part of her worried he'd never recover enough to enjoy whatever life remained. The reality of hospital work, especially in critical care, never got easier. The days continued in a flurry. Emma found herself attending briefings, poring over clinical research in her off hours, and caring for her ICU patients with unyielding focus. Dr. Phillips remained a looming presence, occasionally passing by with veiled disapproval. She heard rumors he was lobbying board members to expedite certain transplant cases for wealthy patrons, further inflaming her resolve to push back. During a late-night study session in the nearly deserted cafeteria, Dr. Aaron Green joined her at a corner table. His kind smile reassured her. "You look like you could use a strong cup of coffee." She laughed weakly, taking the paper cup he offered. "Thanks. I feel like I'm running a marathon I never signed up for." Dr. Green nodded sympathetically. "I know the feeling, but what you're doing is important. I've seen the shift in how people are talking about transplants. More folks are bringing up the ethical side now." Emma felt a glimmer of hope. "It's good to know I'm not alone in this." He leaned back in his chair. "Not at all. Dr. Whitaker's with you. I'm with you. And Dr. Grant obviously supports a thorough approach. Don't let Phillips intimidate you." They chatted a bit more about hospital politics and future plans. Dr. Green mentioned he'd been approached about a research collaboration that could dovetail with Emma's ICU data. She agreed to discuss it further, relieved to have allies in this unfamiliar territory. Before heading home, Emma checked on Mr. Coakley one last time. She adjusted his blanket, whispering a few gentle words, even though he was still heavily sedated. As she left, she glanced at the corridor connecting the ICU to the neuro wing, thinking of James. A few weeks ago, she would never have guessed she'd be working side by side with the brilliant new surgeon who once kept his identity hidden from her. Now, that strange twist of fate felt like an invitation to reshape her entire path as a nurse, and perhaps as a person. Emma was becoming well acquainted with the small conference room on the 10th floor, which had become something of a strategic headquarters for those standing against Dr. Phillips's rushed transplant initiatives. One afternoon, she arrived to find Dr. Whitaker, Dr. Green, and even Dr. Marianne Brown gathering there, reviewing a pile of patient files and discussing how best to defend ethical protocols. "So, the hospital board is meeting next week," Dr. Brown explained, flipping through a dossier. "They want to decide on whether to greenlight a fast-track pilot program, which is essentially Dr. Phillips's plan to push certain cases through quickly." Dr. Whitaker sighed, rubbing the bridge of his nose. "Fast-tracking rarely ends well for patients. There's a reason we have so many checks and balances." Dr. Green pitched in. "Our best bet is to show them the data, both medical and ethical, and to highlight success stories where careful vetting led to higher survival rates. Emma nodded, recalling Mrs. Ramirez, whose precarious condition epitomized the vulnerabilities of patients who might be overlooked. "We should include personal stories," she suggested, "anecdotes from families and patients. Numbers matter, but real lives speak louder." Dr. Brown looked at Emma with approval. "That's a good idea. Let's compile testimonies. Emma, if you can gather some from the ICU perspective, that would be valuable." Midway through the discussion, James stepped in quietly, having been delayed by a procedure. He took a seat next to Emma, giving her a grateful nod. As the group continued planning, Emma felt a sense of camaraderie growing. It was an odd mix of professionals, a veteran cardiologist, an anesthesiologist with a bent for research, a head nurse who was fiercely protective of her staff, and a neurosurgeon torn between hospital politics and patient welfare, yet the shared goal united them. After the meeting, Emma hung back, wanting to speak with James in private. The others trickled out, leaving the two of them by the window overlooking the cityscape. The sun was starting to set, painting the skyline with hues of orange and pink. "I think we have a solid strategy," she said softly, tapping the binder under her arm. "But the board might still be swayed by Phillips's promise of quick, high-profile wins." James nodded. "Phillips has connections. He's been whispering in certain board members' ears for weeks. Our data needs to be indisputable, and our voices unified." Emma's gaze flickered to his. "It helps that we're all on the same page. You have a lot of influence, James. People respect your expertise." His face remained serious. "I'll do what I can, but it's not always enough. Phillips has seniority and a knack for maneuvering. He'd love to see me back down." Emma hesitated, then added quietly, "Well, you won't be standing alone. Neither will I. We'll keep pushing." A faint smile curved his lips. In the fading sunlight, the tension lines around his eyes softened. For a fleeting second, Emma recalled their accidental dinner at the Bistro St. Clair. How candid and warm he'd been without the weight of professional standing. But their moment was interrupted by the ring of James's phone. He checked it, apologized, and hurried off to address a pressing matter in the neuro ward. That evening, Emma found herself in the cramped office of the ICU, organizing the patient testimonials. Some were short notes, others were detailed letters from families praising the hospital staff or lamenting the bureaucratic hurdles that nearly cost their loved ones precious time. Reading the words brought tears to her eyes more than once. It was a stark reminder that behind every statistic was a person with dreams, fears, and a family clinging to hope. Her phone buzzed, a text from Charlotte. "Grab a late dinner. You need a break." Emma realized she hadn't eaten since midday. She typed back a quick acceptance, then headed out. 15 minutes later, she and Charlotte were settled into a nearby diner, the air thick with the aroma of greasy fries and fresh coffee. Charlotte took a bite of her burger and eyed Emma across the table. "So, how's this alliance with Dr. Grant and the others going?" Emma chased a fry around her plate. "It's good. We have a shared cause, and for now that seems stronger than any professional friction. Honestly, I'm relieved not to be fighting alone." Charlotte smirked. "And how about Dr. Grant personally? Still awkward, or?" Emma felt a slight flush. "It's still complicated, but in these meetings, we're just colleagues, working toward the same goal. In some ways, that's easier than rehashing our weird history. Yeah, but you can't deny there's something there," Charlotte teased, wiggling her eyebrows. Emma shrugged, feigning nonchalance. "It's a stressful time. I have no space in my head for romance." But she couldn't quite chase away the small thrill that came whenever James looked at her a certain way. They finished their meal and parted ways. As Emma headed home, She mulled over the notion that she'd unwittingly joined a battle that spanned way beyond her usual nursing duties. Yet, the sense of purpose she felt was undeniable. In uniting with James, Dr. Whitaker, Dr. Green, and Dr. Brown, she'd found a cause that went straight to her heart, ensuring patients received ethical, compassionate care. And that bond of purpose, she realized, was forging real friendships. And maybe something more. A week later, tensions at Hospital Memorial escalated. The board meeting with Dr. Phillips's fast-track pilot program on the agenda was imminent, and the entire staff felt the undercurrent of apprehension. Emma was in the ICU reviewing Ms. Ramirez's file. The woman's condition had deteriorated slightly, her heart was weakening, and it was clear she needed a transplant soon. But without a high donor score, she risked slipping through the cracks. As Emma placed the chart back, she heard raised voices in a nearby corridor. Recognizing one as Dr. Phillips's, she poked her head out and saw him, arms crossed, facing James, who stood his ground with a steely demeanor. "I'm telling you, Grant," Dr. Phillips said, his voice reverberating against the walls, "we can't afford to waste resources on unlikely successes. If we push a few prime cases, we get the funding. Then maybe we can worry about charity cases." James clenched his jaw, glancing around to see if they had an audience. "That's not how medicine should work," he retorted in a calm but firm tone. "We have a responsibility to all patients, not just the ones with newsworthy stories." Dr. Phillips shook his head. "We're running a hospital, not a charity ward." He lowered his voice, but the anger still laced every word. "Don't let your idealism blind you to the bottom line." Emma felt her pulse quicken. She stepped forward, despite the knot in her stomach. "Excuse me, Dr. Phillips, but patients like Ms. Ramirez have every right to fair evaluation. She's not a lost cause." He turned to face her, eyes narrowing. "Nurse Reynolds, I believe you're overstepping. Your opinions were noted in the committee." "That doesn't entitle you to sabotage our hospital's future." James stepped in protectively. "She's advocating for proper medical protocol, which is her duty. If Ms. Ramirez is a suitable candidate, she deserves that chance." Dr. Phillips shook his head in frustration. "Fine, we'll see how this plays out at the board meeting." He stormed off, leaving Emma and James standing there, a charged silence hanging in the air. Emma exhaled shakily. "That got intense quickly." James ran a hand through his hair. "I knew Phillips was pushing the envelope, but I didn't realize how far he'd go. He's basically saying we should pick winners and losers based on publicity." They both knew Dr. Phillips had the ear of influential board members, and if he painted James and Emma as rebellious troublemakers, it might jeopardize their standing. Yet, Emma felt a surge of resolve. She recalled every conversation with Mrs. Ramirez, every faint smile the patient managed when Emma adjusted her bedding or listened to her concerns. During her lunch break, Emma filled Charlotte in on the confrontation. Charlotte's eyebrows shot up. "Wow, Phillips really said that out loud." Emma nodded grimly. "And I can't just ignore it. It's morally wrong." Charlotte grabbed Emma's arm gently. "Just be careful. I admire your courage, but Phillips is powerful. He can make life miserable for you, and for James too." Emma tucked a stray hair behind her ear, her expression resolute. "I know, but if we don't fight for patients like Ms. Ramirez, who will?" That afternoon, Dr. Whitaker called an impromptu session in the 10th floor conference room, inviting Emma, James, Dr. Brown, and Dr. Green. The small group gathered, each bearing worried expressions. "We need a unified approach going into the board meeting, Doctor," Whitaker said, placing a hand on the table. "Phillips's rhetoric is gaining momentum. He's making it sound like we're hindering the hospital's future." Dr. Green pulled out a chart. "If we show these predicted outcomes for high-risk, media-attractive cases versus medically prioritized ones, We can prove how reckless his fast-track plan is. Emma agreed. And we have Ms. Ramirez's case as an example of why we can't just skip over patients who might not have big sponsors or media pull. James added, we also have data from other hospitals that tried similar fast-track programs and ended up with legal battles when patients' results faltered. Dr. Brown glanced around, her eyes brimming with determination. Let's compile everything. Facts, success rates, patient letters. We won't just speak from emotion. We'll bring solid, irrefutable proof that an ethical, methodical approach is better for the hospital long term. They left the meeting with a plan to finalize their presentation. Emma spent the next few hours combing through ICU records, highlighting stories where careful evaluations saved lives. James gathered surgical outcome data, while Dr. Green organized the anesthesia and post-op support figures. Dr. Whitaker and Dr. Brown refined the overall argument, preparing to face off against Dr. Phillips and his allies. As Emma typed away on her laptop in the near-empty break room, she felt a knot of anxiety loosen. Despite the brewing storm, she wasn't alone. She had allies with unwavering resolve. Glancing at the clock, she realized she'd been working past her usual shift end. Yet, for once, she didn't mind staying late. Phillips's threat lingered, but so did Emma's conviction that she was fighting for the right cause. Standing up to him was terrifying, but not standing up seemed unthinkable. She saved her work and closed her laptop, steeling herself for what lay ahead. The real battle was only just beginning, and it would test not only her professional ethics, but also the fragile bonds she'd formed with James and the others in their quest to protect the hospital's integrity. Emma arrived at the hospital before sunrise, determined to get a head start on the avalanche of tasks awaiting her. The board meeting that would decide the fate of Dr. Phillips's fast-track transplant program loomed just days away, and the tension in the corridors felt almost suffocating. Doctors, nurses, and administrative staff all seemed to wear the same undercurrent of anxiety on their faces. As she walked into the ICU, Emma noticed the usual hum of machinery, the subdued chatter of nurses, and the pungent scent of disinfectant. She passed Mr. Bernard Coakley's room, where she glimpsed him dozing fitfully. His vitals had stabilized somewhat, but she knew the damage from his hemorrhagic stroke would take a long, unpredictable path to heal, if it ever did fully. Even so, the small improvements they'd seen felt like little sparks of hope in an often dark ward. She went next to Ms. Irene Ramirez, who was dozing in the corner bed. A heart monitor steadily tracked her weakened pulse, reminding Emma of the critical timeline the woman was on. Irene's eyes fluttered open at the sound of footsteps. "Hey there, Miss Ramirez," Emma said softly, pulling a chair beside the bed. "How are you feeling this morning?" "Better, I think," Irene replied, though her voice was laced with fatigue. "They said my next tests should give us more clarity, but I can tell my strength is fading." Emma tried not to let the sadness show on her face. "We're doing everything we can," she said, tucking the blankets around Irene's shoulders, "and we're hoping your name comes up soon on the transplant list." Irene gave a faint nod, then lapsed into a short, raspy cough. Emma helped her take a sip of water before encouraging her to rest again. Leaving the room, she clenched her jaw. The difference between life and death for Irene could be a matter of timing, and timing was exactly what Dr. Phillips threatened with his push to prioritize other, publicity-friendly cases. After finishing her morning rounds, Emma joined James, Dr. Whitaker, Dr. Green, and Dr. Marianne Brown in the 10th floor conference room. Sheets of paper and laptops cluttered the central table as each person revised numbers, cross-checking them with real patient stories. Even Charlotte had volunteered to help, typing away feverishly at a side desk to compile the testimonies Emma had gathered. James straightened his tie, looking every bit the composed surgeon, though the tense set of his mouth gave away his worry. "We need to finalize our approach," he said, spreading out a series of statistical charts. "Phillips is likely to highlight financial benefits. Our best counter is to show how reckless fast-tracking can backfire. If his PET cases fail, the hospital's reputation could plummet." "And not just reputation," Emma added. "Real patients could lose their chance, like Mrs. Ramirez. She's been here for weeks waiting for the right donor. If they skip over her, she might not survive until the next viable organ becomes available." "Doctor." Whitaker removed his glasses, rubbing the bridge of his nose. "We'll emphasize that point. Phillips frames it as an either-or scenario. Either we chase publicity or we wither away. But we know a balanced approach can draw positive attention without gambling on unqualified recipients." Dr. Brown scanned the group. "Let's also coordinate who speaks when. James, you handle the advanced surgical data. Emma, you'll discuss the ICU perspective. Dr. Green can detail anesthesia risks, and I'll wrap up with an overview of staffing implications. We'll keep it concise but compelling." Emma tried to steady the flutter in her stomach. Public speaking at a high-stakes meeting wasn't her typical role. Yet she felt a swell of resolve when she pictured Irene's weary eyes and heard Dr. Phillips's dismissive words echo in her mind. They spent the next hour refining slides, practicing key talking points, and ensuring each piece of evidence flowed seamlessly to the next. By the end, Emma's mind was buzzing with phrases like patient mortality rate, ethical triage, and resource allocation. It was a stark contrast to the days when her responsibilities were contained to the ICU floor alone. Before dispersing to their respective duties, Dr. Green suggested a short break. Emma used the moment to slip into the hallway with James. The hush outside the conference room felt oddly calming. "Are we ready?" she asked, hugging a folder of notes to her chest. He took a slow breath. "Ready as we can be. We've done the research, we have the data, and our arguments are strong. Phillips will fight back, but he doesn't have the same depth of evidence." Emma nodded, glancing at his focused expression. A memory flashed, how relaxed he'd been at the Bistro St. Clair, asking her about life in the ICU. Now, their connection had evolved from that chance meeting to a shared stand for something much bigger than either of them. In that unspoken moment, she recognized how far they'd both come. James lowered his voice. "Thanks for not giving up. Some people would have retreated the moment Phillips started throwing his weight around." She offered a slight smile. "Backing down isn't really my style." Their eyes met, an unspoken acknowledgement passing between them. Though they had little time for personal reflection, there was a mutual reassurance in knowing they fought on the same side. Moments later, the overhead speaker crackled with a page for James to head to a consult in the neuro ward, and Emma returned to her ICU shift. Yet she felt that stirring of conviction burn brighter, certain that in the battle for ethical care, every small victory, every patient they stood up for, mattered. The following afternoon, Emma was due in the ICU for another shift. She'd managed only a few hours of restless sleep, her mind churning with anxiety over the upcoming board meeting. As she hurried down the main corridor, she noticed Dr. James Grant standing by a window with a pensive look, staring out at the rain-soaked city. He appeared so lost in thought that she almost turned away to let him be, but curiosity and concern propelled her forward. "James," she said softly, "is everything all right?" He blinked, refocusing on her. "Just thinking about tomorrow," he replied, voice subdued. "And some things from my past I'd rather not dwell on." Emma tilted her head, sensing an undercurrent of something deeper. Since they first met, James had occasionally hinted at regrets or burdens he carried, but she'd never pressed him for details. Before she could decide whether to ask further, he offered a faint smile. "Let's just say I learned the hard way how politics can overshadow patient care," he confessed. "I was at a teaching hospital in Chicago where I tried to advocate for more thorough screening of transplant candidates. The administration pushed back, a high-profile case went wrong, and I became the convenient scapegoat." Emma felt a sympathetic jolt. "I'm so sorry. That must have been awful." He nodded, eyes distant. "The press and certain senior doctors made it sound like my impatience caused a patient's death. The truth was more complex. He should never have been selected for a transplant in the first place. But you know how it goes. Once the media latches on, facts can get drowned by headlines." Emma reached out, her fingers lightly touching his forearm in a gesture of comfort. "Is that why you didn't correct me at the bistro? You wanted a chance to be seen as just a person without all that weight." A rueful smile ghosted his lips. "Exactly. If I told you I was Dr. Grant, the new neurosurgeon with a complicated reputation, I figured you'd see me differently. And I—" He paused, exhaling a slow breath. "I guess I wanted a clean slate, if only for an evening." She searched his eyes, absorbing the pain that still lingered. "You shouldn't have to carry that guilt, especially if the administration pushed an unqualified patient. You were trying to do the right thing." His voice grew firmer, though tinged with vulnerability. "That's why I feel so strongly about this board meeting. I can't watch another hospital risk patients' well-being for the sake of prestige. People like Dr. Phillips," he shook his head, "they don't understand the true cost of these gambles." Emma gave his arm a supportive squeeze, then glanced at the time on her phone. "I need to get back to the ICU, but thank you for telling me. I'll keep fighting. You have my word." He nodded appreciatively. "Same here. Let's win this." Their conversation left Emma's thoughts swirling as she returned to her duties. She suspected James's past had shaped his drive for excellence, and perhaps also his guarded nature. Despite the tension of the days ahead, she felt closer to understanding him, and it only strengthened her resolve to stand by him in defending ethical care. In the ICU, Emma checked on Miss Ramirez again. The patient's pallor had worsened, and her breathing came in shallow gasps even with supplemental oxygen. Emma exchanged worried glances with Dr. Whitaker, who was making his rounds. "She's in a fragile state," Dr. Whitaker murmured, scanning the charts. "We need to ensure she's on top of the official list once a matching donor heart is found. If the board tries to reallocate resources elsewhere—" Emma's heart squeezed. "We have to prevent that from happening." Meanwhile, Mr. Coakley's condition showed small improvements, though he remained largely unresponsive. Dr. Marianne Brown confided to Emma that neurosurgery might attempt a new intervention if the hemorrhage continued to recede. Emma nodded, silently praying he'd recover to the point of regaining some semblance of normal life. Toward the end of her shift, she overheard Dr. Phillips in the hallway, speaking on the phone with an irritable tone. He mentioned something about pulling strings and expediting the process. Alarmed, Emma ducked out of sight and strained to catch snippets of the conversation. She couldn't glean many details, but it sounded as though he was working overtime to secure votes for his fast-track proposal. By the time Emma left the hospital that evening, the sky was a dreary grey, and the wind carried an icy chill. She wrapped her coat tighter around herself, her mind racing with everything she'd learned. James's past tragedies, Ms. Ramirez's precarious condition, and Dr. Phillips's dogged determination to push his agenda all churned together in a storm of conflicting pressures. She realized tomorrow's board meeting wouldn't just be a routine policy debate. It was shaping up to be a battleground for the hospital's very soul. Emma tried to get some rest that night, but her thoughts refused to settle. She replayed James's quiet confession in her mind, feeling empathy for the burden he carried. Silently, she vowed to do all she could to prevent history from repeating itself, if that meant standing in front of a room full of decision-makers and challenging them. She was more than ready. In the midst of her swirling anxieties, that simple pledge gave her a thread of calm to cling to. The next morning, the board assembled in the grand conference hall on the hospital's top floor. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a sweeping view of Boston's skyline, but Emma barely took notice. She and the rest of her group, James, T, Dr. Whitaker, Dr. Green, and Dr. Brown, arrived with their meticulously organized documents, ready to present their case against Dr. Phillips's fast-track program. The board members sat around a long table, each with a digital tablet and notepad. Dr. Carver, the hospital director, presided over the meeting, welcoming everyone in a businesslike tone. Dr. Phillips, wearing a self-assured expression, sat near the front with a slick slideshow ready on the projector. He stood first, launching into a well-practiced pitch about the potential benefits of fast-tracking certain transplant cases. He cited statistics on media coverage, philanthropic donations, and how a few high-profile successes could propel the hospital's standing. Emma watched the board members, noticing some nodding in agreement while others wore guarded expressions. When Dr. Phillips ended his presentation, he flashed a triumphant smile, as though already savoring the victory. Then Dr. Carver gestured for James and his group to present their counter-arguments. James stood confidently, clicking through slides that detailed success rates, risk assessments, and how improper screening led to negative outcomes at other institutions. Emma admired the calm authority in his voice. He spoke with expertise, but also with an undertone of genuine concern. Dr. Whitaker emphasized the cardiology perspective, showcasing real cases of patients who needed thorough vetting to ensure no underlying issues sabotaged the transplant success. Dr. Green followed, highlighting anesthesia complications that could arise if candidates weren't carefully selected. Finally, Dr. Brown introduced Emma to speak about the ICU's viewpoint. Stepping forward, Emma took a measured breath. She began with an anecdote about Mrs. Ramirez. Though she didn't disclose her name or identifying information, she painted a vivid picture of a middle-aged patient fading away while waiting for a new heart. Emma described how every shift she saw hope and life slip a little further from those waiting in the ICU. "Patients are more than numbers," Emma said, her voice carrying the urgency of someone who'd witnessed the tragedies firsthand. "The faster we push surgeries for the sake of publicity, the higher the chance we're skipping over those who've been on the list and could genuinely benefit." This isn't just a philosophical question. It's a matter of who lives and who might die. She concluded with a plea for balanced, ethical criteria. The boardroom was silent for a long moment after she finished. Emma's palms were damp with nerves, but she maintained steady eye contact with Dr. Carver. However, Dr. Phillips wasted no time, leaning forward in his seat. "These concerns are theoretical worst-case scenarios," he said, delivering a patronizing half-smile. "We have the capacity to manage high-profile cases and not neglect existing patients. Let's not forget the infusion of funding we gain by elevating our hospital's reputation." An older board member with steel-gray hair and sharp eyes chimed in. "But we must ensure the program doesn't become a publicity stunt. I'd like to see more specific data on how these proposed fast-track cases would be selected." Dr. Phillips hesitated, then provided vague assurances that rigorous guidelines would be in place. Emma bit her lip. She knew that no matter what guidelines he claimed to have, if he had the power to override them for certain individuals, patients like Miss Ramirez could be left behind. Dr. Carver attempted to mediate, asking pointed questions about both proposals. The back and forth lasted well over an hour. Emma and her colleagues presented evidence after evidence, but Dr. Phillips deftly countered, focusing on the hospital's financial woes and the promise of new sponsorship deals. By the end of the marathon meeting, the board remained split. Dr. Carver announced that they'd review all materials overnight and hold a vote the following morning. A buzz of murmurs filled the room as people packed up their things, expressions uncertain. Emma left the conference hall feeling drained. James caught up to her in the corridor, loosening his tie. "We gave it everything," he said quietly, "but I can't tell which way they'll vote." She pressed her lips together, remembering the board members' furrowed brows and calculating gazes. "Phillips's pitch is alluring," she admitted. "I could see how some of them might be swayed by promises of financial stability." Dr. Whitaker approached, a grim set to his features. "We may have hit a wall too high to climb in just one session, but let's not lose hope yet. We still have tonight to gather more evidence if we can." Emma nodded, refusing to let despair take hold. "We can't give up. We owe it to people like Miss Ramirez. Let's regroup and see if there's anything else we can add to our case." As they headed back downstairs, Emma caught the smug look Dr. Phillips tossed in their direction. She felt her stomach twist, but her conviction only hardened. This wasn't over. Regardless of how steep the climb, she and her allies would continue fighting for a fair system, one that recognized every patient's right to a chance at life, not just the ones who could put the hospital's name in lights. That evening, Emma and James reconvened in the nearly vacant hospital cafeteria, sharing a quick meal as they mulled over the day's events. The overhead lights cast a dull glow, and the din of the daytime crowd had vanished, leaving only a handful of staff members scattered about. Their trays of half-eaten sandwiches sat mostly untouched. The intensity of the board meeting had drained their appetites. Emma spoke first. "We need something stronger to tip the scale. Phillips's promises of sponsorships and media coverage are playing on the board's fears about the hospital's finances." James took a sip of water, his jaw tense. "I've been thinking about my old records from Chicago, cases where rushed transplants led to disastrous outcomes. I kept files because I wanted to prove my point someday. If we show them that scenario can happen here, maybe it'll be enough to change minds." "Do you have them on hand?" Emma asked, hope stirring. "I'd have to access my personal archives. They're on a secure drive. I'll see if I can retrieve them tonight, but it might be risky. The confidentiality rules are strict, and I can't expose patient identities. I'll have to redact or anonymize everything carefully." Emma nodded, determined. "Whatever you can manage could help. We just need them to see the potential tragedy, not the specifics of any single patient." Before James could respond, Dr. Whitaker appeared beside their table, a phone pressed to his ear. He ended the call and sighed. "I just spoke to an old colleague from medical school. He has experience dealing with administrators who push these flashy programs. He's sending me some guidance on how to frame the conversation for maximum impact on the board members. It may not be a silver bullet, but every bit helps." Emma offered a grateful smile. "It's good to know we aren't alone in this." "Thanks, Doctor." As the men parted ways to work on last-minute additions to their presentation, Emma turned down the hallway toward the ICU. She had promised Miss Ramirez she'd stop by before heading home. Inside the curtained room, Irene's face looked even paler than it had that morning, and her breathing was labored. "Hey," Emma said gently, pulling a stool close to the bed. "Long day for both of us. Huh?" Irene's lips twitched into a weak smile. "I've been thinking too much, worrying I won't get the transplant in time." Her voice cracked, revealing her underlying fear. "My daughter calls every few hours, asking if there's been any change. I keep telling her to stay hopeful, but part of me..." She trailed off, tears gathering in her tired eyes. Emma placed a comforting hand on Irene's wrist. "We're fighting for you. There's a vote tomorrow that could affect how we handle transplants. I can't promise anything, but please know you're not just a name on a list. People here care about your life." Tears slid down Irene's cheeks. "That's all I need to hear sometimes, that someone cares." Emma swallowed hard, feeling a renewed surge of resolve. She gently adjusted Irene's blankets before stepping out to check Mr. Coakley. The older man was still in a precarious condition, though the medical staff noted a slight improvement in his reflex responses. Encouraged, Emma jotted down some observations in his file. Small victories were still victories. A soft knock at the ICU door made her look up. Charlotte peered in. "Mind if I help? I'm done with my shift, but I can spare some time." Grateful for the support, Emma nodded. As they handled routine tasks, Charlotte gave her a sidelong glance. "You seemed super stressed after the board meeting. How are you holding up?" "Honestly," Emma sighed, "I'm determined, but it's scary. Phillips is a tough opponent. He practically has half the board convinced that quick success stories will fix our financial issues." Charlotte patted Emma's shoulder. "You're doing the right thing, and you've got people in your corner. Dr. Whitaker, Dr. Green, Dr. Brown, and James, obviously." Emma felt a flicker of warmth at the mention of James. "Yeah, he's a big part of this. He's even planning to bring up his experiences from Chicago, though it's risky." Charlotte gave her a knowing smile. "You two work well together, and I don't just mean professionally." Emma flushed slightly, but her friend's words reminded her of the careful bond that had grown between them, one forged in the midst of crisis and moral battles. "I'm not sure if there's space for anything more right now," she admitted, "but I won't deny he's become important to me." They finished their work, and as Emma left the ICU, she waved goodbye to Charlotte. On her way out, she checked her phone. A message from James glowed on the screen. "I have the Chicago files. I'll be working all night to redact them. Wish me luck." She smiled, typing back a quick, "Good luck. Let me know if you need help." Then, stepping into the crisp evening air outside the hospital, she felt that intangible strength that comes from knowing you're not fighting alone. The day had started in near despair, but it ended with allies emerging from unexpected places and new evidence that could tilt the board's decision. It wasn't over yet, but Emma felt, for the first time in days, a glimmer of hope. Morning arrived with a palpable sense of anticipation. The board reconvened, this time in a smaller but equally formal chamber on the same top floor. Emma, James, Dr. Whitaker, Dr. Green, and Dr. Brown all stood near the back, waiting for their turn to speak again. Dr. Phillips sat off to the side, exuding a quiet confidence that made Emma's nerves flare. As Dr. Carver began the session, James stepped forward to distribute a carefully edited set of documents from his Chicago days. He introduced them as hypothetical case studies, illustrating the dangers of expedited transplants. Names and identifying details were blacked out, but the stark facts remained. Patients pushed through for non-medical reasons, complications arising that could have been prevented with better screening, and tragic outcomes that led to lawsuits and public outcry. Some board members flipped through the pages with grim expressions. A few exchanged worried glances, their initial skepticism fading under the weight of tangible evidence. Dr. Phillips's lips thinned. He cleared his throat and tried to downplay the documents as isolated incidents, but the tension in the room suggested otherwise. Next, Dr. Whitaker offered a succinct follow-up, tying the case studies to the hospital's current plan. He pointed out how easily Hospital Memorial could walk down the same path if they bypassed thorough evaluations just to get faster wins. Emma's heart pounded. She saw subtle shifts in the board members' postures, arms uncrossing, heads tilted with renewed interest. Dr. Phillips grew more agitated, flipping through the slides on his tablet, likely searching for a counter. When Emma was invited to speak again, she drew a slow breath. "I want to bring attention to the stories we see in the ICU," she began, voice steady. "We have a patient, anonymized, of course, who has waited patiently for a heart transplant. She doesn't have media connections or deep pockets, but she has a family who loves her and a life she wants to keep living." She described how the patient's condition had deteriorated, how each day the chance of a successful transplant slipped further away, and how bypassing her for a faster or more sensational case was not only a blow to fairness, but potentially lethal. A hush settled over the room when she finished. Emma scanned the board members' expressions, reading empathy in some eyes and caution in others. Dr. Phillips pinched the bridge of his nose in frustration. He finally spoke, attempting a suave counter-argument about financial realities and broader hospital sustainability, but his tone faltered in the face of such poignant testimony. Then Dr. Carver announced they'd move to a final vote. One by one, the board members stated their stance. Emma's adrenaline surged with each vote. The tall woman in the corner seat voted no to fast-tracking, leaning on the ethical concerns. An older man with a stern face voted yes, citing financial pressures. The tally inched forward, tilting precariously between the two sides. It came down to the final board member, a reserved gentleman who had remained relatively silent. He cleared his throat, glancing at Emma, at James, then at Dr. Phillips. "I respect the need for funding," he said slowly, "but these new documents and Ms. Reynolds' testimony illustrate the human cost of prioritizing expediency over medical rigor. I cannot, in good conscience, support the fast-track program." Emma's knees nearly gave out with relief as he voted against Dr. Phillips's proposal. Applause broke out from a few staff members, though the boardroom quickly regained decorum. Dr. Phillips sat stiffly, his lips pressed in a tight line. The final count stood in favor of rejecting his fast-track plan. Instead, the hospital would proceed with the more thorough, ethically grounded approach that Emma and James had championed. Dr. Carver formally concluded the meeting, praising the vigorous debate and emphasizing that patient well-being would remain at the forefront of the hospital's mission. As Emma turned to gather her things, she caught Dr. Phillips's icy glare, but she refused to shrink under it. Yes, he was still a powerful figure at the hospital, but for now their stance had prevailed. Outside, the cluster of allies, James, Dr. Whitaker, Dr. Green, Dr. Brown, and Emma exchanged relieved smiles and brief handshakes. It felt almost surreal. After weeks of tension, they had navigated what seemed like an insurmountable obstacle, thanks to teamwork, meticulous data, and unwavering moral conviction. James moved closer to Emma, still clutching the folder of redacted Chicago files. "We did it," he said, exhaling a shaky breath. Emma smiled back. "We did, though 'we' is the key word. Without your files, Dr. Whitaker's advice, Dr. Green's data, Dr. Brown's leadership, and all the hours we spent refining our arguments, it might have gone the other way." Dr. Sir Brown placed a congratulatory hand on Emma's shoulder. "Your testimony about ICU patients was the tipping point. Don't underestimate the power of real human stories." Emma felt a swell of pride, mingled with overwhelming relief. There was still plenty of work ahead, ensuring the transplant program was implemented properly, following up on patients like Ms. Ramirez and dealing with the inevitable fallout from Dr. Phillips. But this victory had awakened a new confidence in her. She sensed it in James too, as though a heavy weight had lifted from his spirit. They parted ways to return to their units. As Emma descended the elevator, her mind raced with thoughts of how Miss Ramirez might finally stand a chance at receiving the heart she so desperately needed. Yet, amid the swirl of relief and excitement, Emma also felt the fragile threads of deeper change weaving through her own heart. She'd confronted her own fears of speaking out, discovered hidden reserves of resolve, and found an unlikely partnership with a surgeon who once sat at the wrong table. The days following the board's decision felt like a whirlwind in the halls of Hospital Memorial. The fast-track transplant program had been officially set aside, giving room for a more thorough, ethically guided process. In theory, this was a triumph for Emma, James, and their allies. But reality often proved that changing policy on paper did not always translate to harmony in practice. Emma started her shift early one Friday morning, determined to check on Ms. Ramirez. The moment she stepped onto the ICU floor, she sensed a fraught energy in the air. Nurses whispered by the nurses' station, eyes flicking nervously toward Miss Ramirez's room. Emma set her purse and coat in a locker and hurried to see what was happening. Inside, Miss Ramirez looked paler than ever, her breathing shallow. An alarm on one of the monitors had started to chirp, signaling that her oxygen saturation was dropping. Emma wasted no time. She raised the head of the bed slightly, checked the IV lines, and adjusted the flow of supplemental oxygen. Dr. Whitaker joined her, scanning the latest labs. "Her heart function is worsening," he murmured grimly. "If a donor doesn't become available soon," Emma's gaze lingered on the exhausted patient. "We'll keep her comfortable," she whispered, pain lancing her chest at the possibility that Ms. Ramirez might not hold out long enough for a transplant. Before Emma could say more, Dr. Robert Phillips appeared in the doorway, an unwelcome visitor in the ICU. He wore an impeccable suit, brows drawn together in a look that oozed both impatience and smugness. "Dr. Whitaker," Phillips said curtly, "I've been reviewing the new guidelines the board approved. Quite a shift from what I proposed, but it seems we'll have to follow this path for now." Emma bristled but remained silent, busying herself with checking Mrs. Ramirez's vitals. Part of her wanted to confront Phillips, to remind him that this was exactly why they fought to avoid rushing showy procedures that might overlook patients like Miss Ramirez. But she held her tongue. She had won the policy battle. No sense igniting a personal clash in front of a critically ill patient. Dr. Whitaker maintained professional composure. "Yes, the board has spoken. We're committed to a balanced, patient-centered approach." Phillips let out a slow exhale. "Well, I'm here to see if there's any immediate opportunity to demonstrate our success under these new measures. Our donors have increased after all that publicity. Ironically enough," Emma's breath caught. It was almost painful how Phillips reduced a life-saving donation to a line item. She clenched her jaw, remembering James's words about the old fiasco in Chicago, how profit motives and media pressure could warp the entire notion of patient care. Just then, Emma's pager vibrated with an urgent call from the neuro ward. She excused herself, heart pounding. Mr. Bernard Coakley, the older gentleman who had suffered a hemorrhagic stroke, was experiencing unexpected complications. She sprinted down the corridor, praying that whatever was happening was treatable. When she reached Mr. Coakley's room, James Grant stood by the bed, expression tense as he pored over fresh CT scans with the neurology resident. The hum of the ventilator underscored the gravity of the moment. "There's increased swelling," James informed Emma, tapping a spot on the scan. "He might need a procedure to relieve the pressure, or we risk severe brain damage." Emma swallowed hard. She remembered how hopeful they'd felt when his vitals had stabilized. This setback felt like a punch in the gut. "What's the plan?" she asked. James set down the scan. "We're prepping an emergency procedure. I've already called for an OR. Keep him as stable as possible until we're ready to move him." Emma moved quickly, ensuring Mr. Coakley's IV drips were set, that his sedation was adequate, and that his airway would remain protected. Her mind flickered back to Ms. Ramirez, who lay in another part of the ICU, fighting her own battle. The stress of trying to save multiple lives at once tugged at Emma's heartstrings, a stark reminder of the hospital's relentless demands. Just as she finished, James's phone buzzed. He answered with a curt greeting, his brow furrowing as he listened. After a beat, he ended the call and looked to Emma. "They found a potential donor heart for Miss Ramirez. The match is marginal, but might be workable." Emma's eyes widened, relief washing over her. "That's incredible. Does the transplant team know?" James nodded. "They're preparing to confirm viability. It's not perfect, but it could be her best chance." Her chest tightened with both hope and trepidation. She'd seen miracles happen in that ICU, but she also knew how quickly they could slip away. "I'll make sure she's ready," she said softly, already thinking of how to stabilize Ms. Ramirez for possible surgery. James gave her a long, meaningful look. The anxiety and determination in his eyes mirrored her own. "We'll do our best on both fronts, Emma." The next hours became a blur of scheduling, tests, consults, and updates. Emma felt stretched thin, moving between Mr. Coakley's delicate neurological crisis and Ms. Ramirez's impending transplant evaluation. The hospital that morning was a stage for multiple battles at once, some purely medical, others laced with the undercurrents of politics and personal stakes. Eventually, night began to fall on Boston, the city lights twinkling through the window. Emma couldn't shake the sense that they were on the brink of a crucial turning point, one that would test not just her professional skills, but the moral convictions she'd fought to defend in that boardroom. She steeled herself, knowing the biggest challenges often came right when there seemed to be a glimmer of hope on the horizon. By the time dawn broke the following day, Emma was still at the hospital, having pulled a double shift out of necessity. Her feet ached, and her eyes felt gritty from lack of sleep, but she couldn't leave. She'd promised Mrs. Ramirez that she'd stay until there was more clarity on the donor heart. Down in a private consultation room, Emma slumped into a chair, rubbing her temples. Across from her sat Charlotte, who'd come in for her morning shift and found Emma burning the candle at both ends. "You look ready to drop," Charlotte said softly, handing over a coffee cup. "Any news about the heart match?" Emma accepted the cup gratefully. "They confirmed Ms. Ramirez is a viable candidate. We're just waiting on final tests from the donor's side. If everything checks out, she could have surgery as soon as tonight." Charlotte squeezed Emma's hand. "That's fantastic. She's so lucky to have you in her corner." A wry smile touched Emma's lips. "We all are. If Dr. Phillips had his way, Ms. Ramirez might never have had this chance." She sipped her coffee, the warmth doing little to dispel her fatigue. As she refocused on the day ahead, Dr. Marianne Brown approached with a clipboard. "Emma, there's a mandatory staff debrief this afternoon about the new transplant protocol. Since it was approved by the board, Dr. Carver wants to ensure every department is on the same page." Charlotte glanced at Emma. "You going to be awake for that?" Emma exhaled, nodding. "I'll manage. I need to be there to share the ICU perspective. But first, I need to check on Mr. Coakley." She hurried back to his room, where James and a junior neurologist were discussing next steps. The emergency procedure had reduced some pressure on Mr. Coakley's brain, though the road to recovery looked long and uncertain. James greeted Emma with a solemn nod. "Coakley's stable for now, but we'll have to watch carefully for swelling. We might need another scan by evening." Emma quietly noted the creases of exhaustion in James's expression, mirroring her own. "Anything I can do to help?" she asked. He placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "You've already done more than enough. Get some rest if you can, even half an hour. You're no good to anyone if you collapse." Touched by his concern, Emma mustered a soft grin. "I'll see if I can find a spare moment," but with Miss Ramirez's potential surgery, his gaze flickered. "I know, it's a lot." He hesitated, then spoke in a low voice. "The weight of all this, it's not easy. But I wanted you to know, I'm grateful for your dedication. You make this place better." A gentle warmth spread through Emma's chest. Their relationship, once defined by an accidental dinner and professional formality, had deepened into something anchored in mutual respect. She remembered the heartbreak in James's voice when he recounted his Chicago experience. Perhaps in these high-stakes moments, both of them were finding a form of redemption. Several hours later, the staff debrief convened in a large conference room. Emma found a seat next to Dr. Aaron Green, who offered a small wave. Dr. Phillips was present, arms crossed, wearing an expression of studied neutrality. Emma couldn't forget his scathing look from the day before, but she forced herself to stay calm, focusing on the bigger picture, ensuring the new transplant protocol was properly implemented. Dr. Carver explained the policy changes, emphasizing the importance of thorough candidate evaluations and fairness in donor allocation. Emma and Dr. Whitaker chimed in with practical examples from the ICU and cardiology perspectives, while Dr. Green underscored anesthesiology concerns. Throughout the discussion, Dr. Phillips remained mostly silent, though his closed-off body language spoke volumes. When the meeting wrapped up, Emma's shoulders ached with tension. She wanted to believe that the hospital was truly shifting toward a more patient-centered model, but she also knew that not everyone could be won over easily. Dr. Phillips's influence still lurked around every corner. That evening, as Emma trudged back toward the ICU to check Mrs. Ramirez's final test results, she paused by a window overlooking the parking lot. Raindrops streaked the glass, distorting the bright headlights of cars leaving for the night. She let out a slow breath, reflecting on the personal price she'd paid these last few weeks. Long hours, emotional fatigue, ethical battles. Her entire life seemed to revolve around the hospital now. Yet, somewhere in her heart, she sensed a deeper purpose had surfaced. She discovered her own strength in standing up to Dr. Phillips, in collaborating with James, Dr. Whitaker, Dr. Green, and Dr. Brown. Perhaps it wasn't just about saving Miss Ramirez or Mr. Coakley. Maybe this journey was also about Emma confronting her own fears of stepping beyond her comfort zone. A pager beep jolted her from her thoughts. Dr. Whitaker's number flashed on the screen, summoning her urgently to Miss Ramirez's room. Emma's pulse quickened as she started down the corridor. Whatever awaited her now, she felt an unwavering conviction to face it head-on. She had come too far to turn back. Stepping into Miss Ramirez's room, Emma immediately sensed the shift. Nurses surrounded the bed, adjusting IV lines, speaking in hushed voices. Dr. Whitaker stood at the foot, reviewing the latest echocardiogram results. He glanced up when Emma entered, relief flickering across his features. "It's happening," he said, sounding both solemn and hopeful. "We got the final go-ahead from the transplant team. Ms. Ramirez's donor heart is en route." Emma's heart leaped. She'd spent so many hours by this woman's side, fighting for her chance at a future. Now it appeared that chance had finally arrived. "When do they plan to start?" "As soon as the organ arrives, they'll take her into surgery," Dr. Whitaker replied, turning to Miss Ramirez. Though weak, she managed a small, tremulous smile. "Emma," Miss Ramirez murmured, her voice trembling with emotion, "thank you for never giving up on me." Emma blinked back tears. "We're a team here. You just focus on staying strong, okay?" The rest of the afternoon blurred as Miss Ramirez was prepared for the operating room. Emma busied herself with preoperative procedures, verifying medical records, ensuring the correct blood type cross-match, and explaining the process in a gentle but clear voice. Despite her exhaustion, she felt a wave of renewed energy fueled by the promise of a life-saving surgery. Once Ms. Ramirez was safely wheeled into the OR. Emma lingered outside in the waiting area, too restless to sit. She offered a silent prayer that the new heart would fit seamlessly, that no last-minute complications would arise. Memories of Dr. Phillips's talk about prime cases flickered in her mind, but she pushed them aside. This was exactly why they had fought so hard, so that people like Ms. Ramirez wouldn't be lost in the shuffle of hospital politics. Soon, James arrived, having been updated by Dr. Brown. He was still wearing his scrub cap from a recent neurosurgery case, the faint lines of pressure etched on his forehead. "I heard Ms. Ramirez finally got the green light," he said, voice subdued yet hopeful. Emma nodded, feeling the tension ease slightly in his presence. "They've started. Dr. Whitaker's assisting the transplant surgeon. It all feels surreal." James placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "It's moments like this that remind us why we do what we do, right?" She met his gaze, recalling the stories he'd shared of his past, how one rushed case could darken a bright career. Now, they stood on the verge of a triumphant outcome. "Yes," she agreed softly, "this is why we fought." Time crawled as they waited. The OR staff came and went, occasionally providing updates. Emma paced the hallway, forced to confront the helplessness of being on the sidelines when all she wanted to do was ensure everything went flawlessly. James tried to distract her, discussing the latest research in neurology or asking about her background, but neither could suppress their underlying worry. At last, Dr. Whitaker emerged from the OR, pulling down his surgical mask. Emma rushed to him, scanning his face for signs of success or defeat. A weary but genuine smile crept across his lips. "It's in, and it's beating," he declared, voice thick with emotion. "We won't know the full outcome for a while, but so far, it looks promising." Emma felt tears prick her eyes as she let out a relieved breath. "Thank you," she whispered, though she wasn't sure if she was addressing Dr. Whitaker, fate, or some higher power. James exhaled a small sigh, a gentle hand at her elbow, sharing in her moment of joy. They were only at the beginning of Mrs. Ramirez's recovery, but Emma allowed herself to celebrate this fragile victory. There would still be challenges, risk of rejection, infections, months of close monitoring. But for now, the tide had turned in a positive direction. Later that night, Emma found herself back in the ICU, ensuring Mrs. Ramirez was settled in her post-op bed. Machines beeped in controlled rhythms, indicating that the new heart was functioning steadily. Emma's exhaustion melted into a sense of awe, watching the faint rise and fall of Mrs. Ramirez's chest. If all went well, this woman would return to her family, freed from the shadow that had haunted her for so long. Moments after finishing her checks, she stepped out to find James leaning against the hallway wall, arms crossed lightly. He wore an expression of quiet contentment. As Emma joined him, he cleared his throat. "It's almost like the end of a chapter," he said, voice hushed. "Not just for Ms. Ramirez, but for all of us. We've proven that careful evaluation and perseverance can work, no matter what people like Phillips say." Emma offered a smile, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "It feels like a personal transformation too. I never thought I'd get so involved in policy or big-picture debates, but here we are." He nodded, warmth in his gaze. "Here we are, indeed. And we make a good team." She couldn't help the small laugh that escaped her lips. A team, that was what they had become, from an accidental dinner date to co-combatants in a hospital war. In that fleeting moment, Emma felt a new confidence, as though the obstacles that once seemed insurmountable had forged a stronger version of herself. They parted ways soon after, knowing the coming days would require vigilance over Ms. Ramirez's fragile post-op state. Yadil, Emma felt a deepening sense of calm settle in her chest, a sense that the trials she'd faced had awakened a resilience she never knew she had. And somehow, she suspected James felt the same. In the ensuing week, Ms. Ramirez's transplant recovery went better than most dared to hope. Each day brought incremental improvements. Her lungs cleared more efficiently, she needed less ventilatory support, and her color began returning to a healthier hue. Emma was elated to see these positive signs, especially given how close Ms. Ramirez had come to losing her chance. But the hospital rarely paused for victory laps. While Emma and the ICU team focused on Ms. Ramirez's progress, a new swirl of rumors circulated. Reports emerged that Dr. Robert Phillips might be maneuvering behind the scenes, putting pressure on influential donors to question the hospital's slower but safer transplant approach. One overheard conversation implied Phillips was lobbying for a re-evaluation of the newly established protocols, claiming the hospital risked wasting precious organs on borderline patients. When Emma heard these whispers in the staff lounge, her jaw tightened. She recalled Phillips's dismissive attitude toward Miss Ramirez, how he'd practically labeled her a lesser candidate. Miss Ramirez was now living proof that thorough screenings and timing saved lives. If Phillips had his way, more patients in similar circumstances could be overlooked. Later that day, Emma met with James, Dr. Whitaker, Dr. Green, and Dr. Marianne Brown in the same 10th-floor conference room that had become their war room. Dr. Brown began, arms folded. "I've received word that Dr. Phillips is trying to call an emergency hospital council meeting. He wants to introduce revisions to the transplant policy." Dr. Green shook his head. "We literally just settled this. The board voted. This is a blatant attempt to undermine the decision." Dr. Whitaker's face hardened. If he's got powerful donors in his corner, he might push the administration to hear him out again. Emma felt a flicker of frustration. How many times do we have to prove the same point? Miss Ramirez's successful transplant alone should speak volumes. James, who had been silent, finally cleared his throat. "We can't assume logic will prevail, not when politics are involved. Phillips wants a final stand. We need to meet him with clear evidence and show that rushing or cherry-picking transplants isn't just unethical, it's dangerous." Dr. Brown nodded, turning to Emma. "You've been closest to Mrs. Ramirez's case. Her improvement is a testament to how correct triage can work wonders. Think you can gather her relevant data without breaching confidentiality to present at this meeting if it happens?" Emma's brows lifted. "Yes, I have her progress notes, daily vitals, all the documented improvements. I just need to anonymize anything that could reveal her identity." Dr. Whitaker put a hand on Emma's shoulder. "This might be the final test for all of us. We've proven ourselves once, but we must be ready to defend it again if Phillips forces the issue." They broke from the meeting with a plan. Gather the latest patient data, highlight success stories, and reaffirm that the current, more cautious transplant protocol served the hospital's long-term reputation better than quick publicity. Emma felt a weary sense of déjà vu. Once again, they were preparing for confrontation, but this time with a deeper conviction that their stance was undeniably correct. That evening, Emma found James in the corridor outside the neuro wing, slumped against a wall in a rare display of exhaustion. She approached quietly. "Long day?" He exhaled sharply. "We had back-to-back surgeries, and I had to referee an argument between two residents over a questionable scan. And now Phillips is stirring trouble again." He raked a hand through his hair. "Sometimes I wonder if this place will ever truly know peace." Emma managed a small smile. "Probably not, but that's the nature of a hospital. Still, we can hold to our principles. We owe it to patients like Miss Ramirez and Mr. Coakley." At the mention of Mr. Coakley, James's expression brightened slightly. "He's making slow progress, by the way. Not out of the woods, but the last scan showed reduced swelling. He might have a chance at regaining some functionality." Her relief was palpable. "That's wonderful news. Maybe we'll get 2 miracles in 1 month." Their eyes met, and Emma saw a reflection of her own determination in James's gaze. For a fleeting second, she wondered what might have been if she'd known from the start that he was a surgeon at Hospital Memorial. Would she have grown so invested in his moral battles? Probably not. Fate had brought them together in a roundabout way, and now she couldn't imagine facing these challenges without him. Stepping closer, she lowered her voice. "So, if Dr. Phillips does get his emergency meeting, we'll stand united again, right?" "Always," James said softly. Then he added, "This hospital, it's become my second chance. I can't let someone like Phillips undermine it." Emma felt a tender surge in her chest, recalling how James had once been shunned in Chicago over a flawed transplant case. Here, he had regained his voice and used it to protect patients. "We won't let him," she replied, a quiet certainty in every syllable. They said goodnight, aware that the next few days would be filled with hurried data collection, political maneuvering, and no small amount of stress. Yet Emma felt resolute. They'd faced one storm already and emerged victorious, tired and shaken, but victorious. If Phillips wanted another fight, they would give it everything they had, fortified by success stories and strengthened by the trust they had built in each other. Tension rippled through the hospital corridors one crisp morning when the announcement came. Dr. Phillips had succeeded in calling an emergency hearing. Donors, select members of the board, and key department heads were to gather in an auditorium on the ground floor. Emma learned about it via a mass email from Dr. Carver, who stated that recent developments in the transplant program warrant open discussion. As Emma headed there with her binder of anonymized data, she couldn't help the flutter of nerves in her stomach. Unlike the formal board meeting, this would be a larger, less predictable gathering. Dr. Phillips, never one to shrink from the spotlight, would no doubt take advantage of the bigger audience. She arrived to find the auditorium half-filled. Rows of chairs faced a makeshift podium. Dr. Carver stood at the front, reviewing note cards. Dr. Whitaker, Dr. Green, and Dr. Brown offered Emma small nods of encouragement from a side row. James was still on his way, finishing a consult on the neuro floor. When Dr. Phillips took the podium, the hush that fell was electric. He launched into a polished speech, lamenting the inefficiencies in the new transplant guidelines, claiming they would limit our ability to help patients swiftly and decisively. He painted the old fast-track concept as a surefire method to attract philanthropic support, crucial for the hospital's future. Emma glanced around. She saw some furrowed brows, but also a few intrigued faces, likely donors who harbored concerns about how their money was being spent. This was Phillips's arena, stoking financial fears to gain leverage. She caught sight of James entering quietly at the back, slipping into a seat. He nodded once at Emma, and she felt her shoulders relax a fraction. They'd faced Phillips before, but now was the time to reveal the real-world success of the new approach. Finally, Dr. Carver invited anyone with counterpoints to speak. Dr. Whitaker led off, reminding the audience that swift doesn't always mean safe in transplant medicine. He underscored the complexities of matching donor organs, emphasizing that a single botched case would harm not just the patient, but the hospital's reputation for years. Next, Emma took a steadying breath and approached the microphone. She introduced herself as Emma Reynolds from the ICU, her heart drumming a frantic beat. With practiced resolve, she shared select details of Ms. Ramirez's journey, presenting her progress with daily vital charts, annotated and anonymized, to show the life-threatening decline and subsequent revival after thorough screening, and the proper wait for a suitable heart. "She's still recovering," Emma stated, clearing her throat. "But each day, she grows stronger. If we had rushed to find any available organ without the right criteria, or if we had deemed her unworthy of the limited resource, we might not have seen this outcome. This isn't theoretical. It's a real life, one that could have been lost." A ripple of murmurs passed through the crowd. Emma spotted a few nods, some glimmers of understanding. She stood firm, determined not to let Dr. Phillips's rhetoric overshadow the human story in front of them. "Dr." Phillips attempted to interject, but Dr. Carver politely gestured for him to wait. Then James rose, holding a slim folder. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, voice calm but resonant, "I'd like to highlight how a thorough protocol not only saves patients but also fosters trust among staff. It's demoralizing to force healthcare workers to bypass critical screenings for the sake of speed or publicity. When staff trust the system, outcomes improve. That translates into better statistics, not just for one high-profile case, but for every patient who walks through our doors." Emma caught the quick flash of admiration in Dr. Brown's eyes. Clearly, James's credibility as the new but highly respected neuro chief carried weight. Dr. Phillips's jaw tightened, his smooth confidence wearing thin. In the final moments, Dr. Carver opened the floor for a broader vote of confidence in the existing yet more methodical transplant policy. Donors and department representatives hesitated at first, but the combination of Whitaker's medical gravitas, James's unwavering logic, and Emma's poignant patient story tipped the balance. One by one, key figures voiced their support. The tension broke like a fever. Dr. Phillips stood rigid, face tight with frustration. While he still wielded influence, it was clear he lacked the groundswell needed to topple the carefully constructed arguments. When Dr. Carver announced that the hospital would formally uphold the new transplant approach, the modest applause that echoed through the auditorium felt like a resounding victory. People filed out, buzzing about Ms. Ramirez's case. Emma remained in her seat for a moment, letting the relief wash over her. This was not just a repetition of the board meeting, it was a larger reaffirmation, a second reckoning that left little room for Phillips to maneuver. James approached, extending a hand to help her stand. "You did great," he said quietly, a broad smile chasing away his usual reserve. "Ms. Ramirez's story. It's the best proof we have of why we need to do things the right way." Emma squeezed his hand in gratitude. "We all did this together," she replied, her voice thick with emotion. "And now, hopefully, we can focus on what truly matters, our patients, without constantly looking over our shoulders." A few rows away, Dr. Whitaker, Dr. Green, and Dr. Brown offered Emma and James congratulatory nods. Their small coalition felt stronger than ever, bonded by trials and triumphs alike. As Emma left the auditorium, she felt a sense of resolution settle over her. They had confronted not just the external obstacles of politics and ambition, but also the internal fear that speaking up might cost them dearly. Instead, it had led them to a place of clarity, where dedication to each patient's life shone brighter than any headline or sponsorship deal. Emma arrived at Hospital Memorial early, drawn by a sense of promise in the crisp morning air. The tension that had clung to the corridors for weeks finally seemed to ebb, replaced by a quieter, more hopeful energy. Dr. Phillips's second defeat in the emergency hearing had solidified the hospital's commitment to a thorough, patient-centered transplant protocol. People spoke of the shift in subdued tones, cautious optimism tempered by the realities of hospital life. She headed first to the ICU, where Ms. Ramirez, now 3 weeks post-transplant, was steadily regaining her strength. Stepping into the room, Emma was greeted by a sight that made her heart soar. Irene Ramirez, sitting upright, pale but alert, cautiously lifting a spoonful of broth to her lips. The oxygen tube still trailed from her nose, but the improvement was undeniable. "Morning, Ms. Ramirez," Emma said, approaching with a soft smile. "How are you feeling today?" Irene paused, mid-spoonful. Though her hand trembled slightly, her eyes held a new vitality. "Better, I think. The food doesn't taste like cardboard anymore, so that's progress, right?" Emma let out a small laugh. "I'll take that as a very good sign." Irene's gaze flicked toward the large window. "They told me I might be moved out of the ICU soon if this keeps up. Hard to believe I was so close to—" She trailed off, a shiver passing over her features. Emma gently adjusted the blankets around Irene's shoulders. "You've come a long way, and you'll keep getting stronger." Quiet footsteps in the hall drew Emma's attention, and Dr. Whitaker appeared in the doorway, his expression bright as he checked the heart monitor. "Everything looks good this morning," he remarked, flipping through a chart. "No signs of rejection. We'll continue the immunosuppressants, but if all goes well, you'll graduate to the step-down unit by the end of the week." Irene exhaled with relief, gratitude shining in her eyes. "I owe this to all of you, every nurse, every doctor. I don't have enough words to thank you." Emma caught Dr. Whitaker's knowing smile. He gave Irene's shoulder a comforting pat before excusing himself to see other patients. As Emma finished her tasks, she felt the gentle dawn of a new phase at Hospital Memorial, one where success stories like Irene's were not overshadowed by politics or rushed ambition. Exiting the ICU, Emma headed to Mr. Coakley's room. He remained under close neurological observation, and his journey was a stark contrast to Ms. Ramirez's more rapid progress. He lay in bed, eyes half closed, the flicker of comprehension elusive. Still, the monitors indicated tiny improvements in his brain function each day, a testament to the slow but possible recovery from his hemorrhagic stroke. Stepping closer, Emma murmured a greeting, even though he couldn't reply in words. Sometimes she swore she saw a flicker of recognition in his eyes. She recounted little updates about the hospital, a habit she'd developed, offering a semblance of normalcy. It was a deeply rooted belief of hers that patients, even in altered states, benefited from hearing a warm human voice. Just as Emma was repositioning Mr. Coakley's pillows, she heard someone enter behind her. Turning, she found James Grant, expression quietly hopeful. "His last scan showed a slight decrease in swelling," James said, glancing at Mr. Coakley's chart. "We're scheduling another therapy consult. There's a chance he might respond to more tactile and verbal stimulation soon." Emma felt a wave of gratitude for James's unwavering commitment. In the swirl of controversies and administrative battles, he'd never lost sight of individual patients. "That's wonderful news," she said, offering him a small, genuine smile. They left the room together, stepping into the corridor. James tucked the chart under his arm, hesitating before speaking. "You're working a full shift again today?" Emma nodded, hugging her clipboard. "Yes, but I'm off tomorrow, thankfully. Thinking about taking an actual day of rest." James's lips curved with the faintest trace of a grin. "You deserve it. After everything, we all deserve a moment to breathe." They walked on in companionable silence. Nurses and doctors bustled past, but the charged tension once so palpable seemed to have dissipated. There was still plenty of hard work, occasional emergencies, and the undercurrent of hospital politics, but the sense of crisis had eased. Later, as Emma stood in the staff lounge briefly sipping a cup of coffee, she mulled over how much had changed. She thought about that accidental dinner with James months ago, the shock of discovering he was her new boss, the swirling drama with Dr. Phillips. Now, she saw that every challenge had shaped her into a more confident and resilient nurse, someone unafraid to speak up, to confront ethical dilemmas head-on. A beep on the overhead speaker interrupted her thoughts, calling her to a short departmental briefing about the new transplant guidelines. As she headed toward the meeting room, Emma recognized that the hospital was no longer just a workplace. It felt like a crucible where her inner strengths had been honed, forging a renewed sense of purpose she'd never truly known before. 2 weeks later, Emma stepped outside the hospital's front doors to find the season had shifted. Gone was the biting chill that characterized early spring in Boston. In its place lingered softer breezes that hinted at warmer days ahead. She let the sun warm her face, reflecting on how life at the hospital had also taken on a gentler rhythm. Charlotte called her name, jogging over from the staff parking lot. "Heading out already?" her friend teased. "You're not staying for the staff luncheon?" Emma shook her head, tucking stray hair behind her ear. "I've got a family gathering tonight. My mother's coming into town, and I promised I wouldn't be late." In truth, she'd been missing the simpler parts of life outside the hospital: family dinners, quiet evenings, the smell of homemade food. Charlotte grinned. "Good for you. You've been practically living here. Enjoy the break." Emma found her car in the crowded lot and let out a content sigh once behind the wheel. It felt good to leave the hospital on time, guilt-free. The drive back to her small apartment carried an air of freshness, as though the city itself was offering her a renewed perspective. At home, she changed into casual clothes, tidied her living space, and checked the time. Her mother, Harriet Reynolds, was due in less than an hour, traveling from Cape Cod for a rare overnight visit. Emma had spent so many months buried in the hospital's drama that she realized with a pang she hadn't really caught up with her mother. Harriet's texts had grown concerned, sensing Emma's stress but never pressing her to explain. When Harriet arrived, Emma wrapped her in a tight hug, breathing in the comforting scent of lavender that always seemed to cling to her mother's clothes. "Come in, Mum. I'm so glad you're here." Harriet, a petite woman in her early 60s, surveyed the apartment with motherly scrutiny. "It's cozier than last time I visited," she remarked, eyeing the fresh bouquet of flowers on the kitchen counter, "though you still need more throw pillows." Emma laughed, flipping on a lamp. "I'll add it to my to-do list." They settled into the small living room, Emma fetching them both mugs of tea. Harriet's eyes sparkled with a mixture of love and concern. "How have you been, dear? You look different. Stronger, maybe?" Emma considered how to answer, recalling months of nighttime shifts, emotional confrontations with Dr. Phillips, and the quiet moments at patients' bedsides. "I've been through a lot," she admitted, "but it's turned out okay. Actually, I think I've found a deeper sense of purpose at the hospital. It's not just about going through the motions anymore." Her mother listened intently. Emma spoke about Ms. Ramirez's successful transplant, about Mr. Coakley's slow but steady recovery, and how the staff had banded together to champion more ethical policies. Harriet's face softened with pride. "That sounds like important work. You always did care so deeply about people." They spent the evening reminiscing over old family stories, Harriet filling Emma in on neighborhood gossip from Cape Cod. Between laughter and warm sips of tea, Emma recognized how crucial these small pockets of normalcy were for her psyche. She felt a renewed desire to balance her life, be the dedicated nurse, but also a woman with her own passions, connections, and simpler joys. Later that night, Harriet insisted on cooking dinner in Emma's compact kitchen. As the aroma of roasted chicken and rosemary wafted through the apartment, Emma's phone vibrated with a text from James. Mr. Coakley opened his eyes today. Responded slightly to verbal commands. Figured you'd want to know. Emma found herself smiling at the message, heat rising to her cheeks at the realization of how James's updates now felt personal, not just professional. She typed back a quick response, thanking him, a gentle flutter stirring in her chest. She wondered if Harriet noticed the subtle grin on her face. When dinner was served, mother and daughter toasted to life's small victories. Harriet's new garden patch, Emma's recent breakthroughs at work, and the comforting presence of each other. The warm glow of the lamp illuminated the table, casting soft shadows on the walls. For a fleeting moment, Emma allowed herself to relax fully, letting the wave of gratitude flood her senses. Later, as Harriet retired to the guest room, Emma lingered by the window in the living room. She stared at the faint city lights, thinking of the hospital floors where she spent so many nights. She felt a tug of nostalgia, like she was returning from a long journey to find home changed, yet somehow more welcoming. In the quiet hush of that moment, Emma recognized that her own internal world had shifted too. She was no longer the unsure nurse who'd accidentally sat at the wrong table on a blind date, nor the anxious woman grappling with hospital hierarchies. She'd grown into someone who could fight for what mattered, stand against adversity, and then still return to the warmth of family and the comfort of home. The next morning, Harriet insisted on accompanying Emma to Hospital Memorial, eager to see the place where her daughter spent so many hours and meet the colleagues Emma had spoken about with such admiration. Emma hesitated, worried that the bustle might overwhelm her mother, but Harriet was undeterred. Walking through the lobby, Harriet marveled at the neat rows of chairs, the polished floors, and the swirl of medical professionals and visitors. "So this is your second home," she teased, glancing at Emma. "Looks busier than I imagined." Emma smiled in agreement. "There's never a dull moment here." They were soon joined by Charlotte, who greeted Harriet with effusive warmth. "It's so nice to finally meet Emma's mom. She's told me all about your amazing baking skills. Any chance you brought cookies?" Harriet laughed, shaking her head. "No cookies this time, but next visit I'll remember to stock up." As they chatted, Dr. Whitaker appeared, offering a polite greeting to Harriet. "Emma's been indispensable to the ICU these past months," he said, voice tinged with genuine respect. "She has a talent for balancing empathy and practicality." Harriet's eyes shone with pride, and Emma felt a little bashful under the praise. She guided her mother to Mrs. Ramirez's room, where Harriet quietly observed the post-transplant routine. The patient rested comfortably, a slight flush of color in her cheeks, a stark contrast to the nearly lifeless form Emma had cared for weeks ago. When Miss Ramirez opened her eyes, Emma introduced her mother. Irene offered a tentative wave, still cautious with her energy. Harriet stepped closer, voice gentle. "I've heard so much about your bravery." Mrs. Ramirez smiled faintly. "I'm just thankful to be breathing on my own again. Emma and everyone here, they gave me the will to keep going." Harriet gave her hand a supportive squeeze, and Emma felt a surge of emotion at witnessing this moment of connection. So often, patients existed as names on charts or daily tasks to be managed, but Harriet's presence cast a more humanizing light on it all, like bridging Emma's private world with her professional one. Soon after, James arrived, carrying a thick folder of charts and wearing that habitual look of composed focus. Harriet observed him curiously, as Emma explained he was the head of neurosurgery. He greeted Harriet politely, acknowledging her with a courteous nod. "Emma speaks a great deal about you," Harriet remarked, tone playful. "I'm glad to see she has good support here." James's cheeks colored slightly, but he maintained composure. "We work well together," he said, leaving the sentence gently ambiguous. They parted ways so James could continue his rounds, and Emma accompanied her mother downstairs, planning to show her the garden courtyard where some patients took short, rehabilitative walks. Harriet paused at the elevator, glancing back with thoughtful eyes. "You two certainly have a connection." Emma felt heat creep up her neck. "It's complicated. He's my boss, technically. But we've, been through a lot together. It's turned into a strong friendship." Harriet gave her a knowing smile, pressing the elevator button. "Sometimes the deepest bonds form under the greatest challenges. Don't let titles fool you." They reached the courtyard, where a few physical therapy sessions were underway. Soft sunshine filtered between the high walls, and a gentle breeze rustled the small patches of greenery. Harriet sat on a bench, observing the determined steps of a man relearning to walk with a therapist's support. Emma recognized him as another transplant recipient from the previous year, someone who had, against odds, recovered enough to be mobile again. Emma sighed contentedly, feeling a ripple of fulfillment in seeing the tangible fruits of her work. Harriet placed a hand on Emma's arm. "It's beautiful, what you and your colleagues do. It reminds me that behind every statistic or debate is a person who wants more life." Emma nodded, recalling Ms. Ramirez's new lease on life, Mr. Coakley's slow but hopeful recovery, and countless other patients who had passed through the hospital's doors. She thought back to the intense meetings with Dr. Phillips, the board showdowns, and the hours she and James spent gathering evidence. All that turmoil had, in the end, reaffirmed the best of what medicine could be. They lingered in the courtyard until Harriet had seen enough to feel the heart of the hospital, its patients, staff, and subtle daily miracles. On their walk back inside, Harriet patted Emma's shoulder gently. "I'm proud of you, dear. You've grown so much, facing adversity and finding a way to stay true to yourself." Emma felt her throat tighten with emotion. She remembered the girl she'd been only a few months before, uncertain and hesitant. Now, there was a quiet assurance in her steps. She realized that Harriet was right. She had changed, and in a way that made her more open-hearted yet stronger in her convictions. Together, they wandered past the ICU's glass-paneled doors one last time, before Harriet prepared to depart. Emma suppressed a swell of gratitude, grateful for this moment where her mother could see firsthand the life Emma had forged, a life brimming with challenges, yes, but also immense hope and purpose. That evening, Emma stood in the nearly empty break room, gazing through the window at the distant city lights. Harriet's visit had left her feeling comforted and introspective. She'd walked her mother out to her car with heartfelt goodbyes, promising to call more often. Now, alone with her thoughts, Emma mulled over how to build a more balanced life, one that honored her dedication to the hospital but also nurtured personal connections. She heard footsteps behind her and turned to see James, still in his scrubs, the faint lines of a long shift etched on his face. He studied her for a moment, a slight smile shaping his lips. "I've been looking for you," he said softly. "Got a minute?" She nodded, and they moved to a quieter corner near a row of chairs. She caught sight of the tension in his shoulders, a lingering residue from the day's demands. "Everything all right?" she asked, voice low. He gave a small shrug. "As all right as it can be in a hospital. Mr. Coakley's responding better to therapy. Ms. Ramirez continues to improve. The staff morale seems higher now that Philip's influence has diminished." Emma felt relief flood her chest. "It's like we're finally seeing the results of all that hard work." James leaned forward, his voice quieter. "I wanted to say something. After everything that's happened, your support, your insights, the courage you showed in those meetings, you've changed how I see this profession. You've reminded me that medicine isn't just about knowledge or skill. It's about heart, something I'd lost sight of for a time." Emma's cheeks warmed. and she tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. "I could say the same about you. You've shown me that we can push boundaries and still stay true to our values." He paused, struggling for words. Then, in a rare moment of vulnerability, James reached for her hand. "Would you like to get dinner sometime? Outside this hospital, no confusion about tables or blind dates this time." Her heart fluttered. She recalled the day they first met at the Bistro St. Clair, a tangled web of mistaken identity and half-truths. Now the path seemed clearer. "I'd like that," she said, a soft smile lifting her lips. They let the silence linger, a mutual understanding passing between them. Whatever lay ahead, they would face it not as strangers or uneasy colleagues, but as two people who had grown together through trials and triumphs. They parted with a warmth that felt both new and long overdue. Early the next morning, Emma entered the ICU to find Ms. Ramirez awake and smiling. The new heart had given her enough energy to sit up and chat in short bursts. Emma pulled a stool beside the bed, marveling at the woman's transformation. "I might be leaving the ICU for good soon," Ms. Ramirez said, a hint of awe in her voice. "The doctors think I can move to a regular floor. Can you believe that?" Emma's eyes glistened. "You've been through the worst, Irene. You deserve this fresh start." Irene let out a watery laugh, glancing at the door. "I plan to walk out of here on my own 2 feet, you know." Emma offered an enthusiastic nod. "And I'll be cheering you on." Later, she checked on Mr. Coakley, who was undergoing a speech therapy session with a specialist. Though his words were slurred and progress came in millimeters, his eyes held a spark of determination. She felt a surge of pride, remembering the day he'd been rushed in, hemorrhage threatening to take his life. The resilience of the human body and spirit never ceased to amaze her. At midday, Dr. Brown convened a brief staff meeting. She commended the ICU team's hard work, referencing Mrs. Ramirez's successful transplant and Mr. Coakley's gradual recovery as beacons of what Hospital Memorial could achieve when everyone aligned for the right reasons. Emma, standing in the back, felt a quiet glow of satisfaction, recalling the rocky road they had all traveled together. By late afternoon, as she wrapped up her shift, Emma found herself gazing around the ICU one last time. The beep of monitors, the purposeful strides of nurses, the muted hum of patients' families talking in low voices, it all felt like a second home. But something in her heart told her this wasn't just the end of a chapter, it was the start of a new horizon. She'd grown into a stronger, more self-assured version of herself, carrying the lessons of compassion and courage in every step. On her way out, she stopped by the same hospital entrance where she had once rushed in, frightened and uncertain about her future under the new, renowned neurosurgeon. The memory made her smile. She walked outside, letting the fresh air fill her lungs. Her phone buzzed with a message, James, suggesting a particular restaurant that served the best clam chowder in Boston. She typed back an enthusiastic reply, excitement fluttering in her stomach. Emma took a moment to watch the late afternoon sun reflect on the windows of surrounding buildings. She felt tears prick the corners of her eyes, a wave of gratitude overwhelming her, for the patients who survived, for those who didn't, yet taught her something precious about empathy, for the colleagues who became friends, and for this version of herself who, through adversity, had discovered a wellspring of strength and love she never knew she possessed. She headed to her car, keys jingling in her hand, heart light despite the exhaustion in her muscles. A few months ago, she couldn't have imagined how a mistaken seat at a blind date would unravel a journey so profound. Now, she welcomed whatever tomorrow might bring, each day a testament to hope, resilience, and the quiet, determined spirit that made her not just a nurse, but a guardian of life's fragile miracles. I hope you enjoyed today's story. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss more stories like this. Leave a like and comment below what you thought of the story. See you in the next video.